Chapter 1473, Divine Powers. Chapter 1473, Divine Powers. The voice of the storyteller continued ringing. There were way too many experts that died in the Kunlun ruins. Countless of them. Countless divine powers were released in that unprecedented battle. Even though the Kunlun mountain range was destroyed, there are still extremely terrifying divine powers remaining in the ruins that last forever. Suzimo was secretly alarmed. In the Primordial War, countless races were destroyed and the Primordial 9 races suffered immense losses with all 3 taboos dead. How vast and terrifying were the remaining divine powers in the Kunlun ruins? It was completely unimaginable. The storyteller said, these terrifying divine powers form an extremely unique domain. Any Mahayana patriarch that enters it will easily cause a divine power storm. Divine power storm. Suzimo and Demoness G exchanged glances. Given their cultivation realms, it was difficult for them to imagine what sort of an existence the so-called divine power storm was. In fact, neither of them knew much about divine powers. The storyteller said in a deep voice, a Mahayana patriarch might be able to survive if a lesser divine power storm is triggered. However, if a greater divine power storm is triggered, they'll be doomed. If it's a supreme divine power storm, even emperors would be shredded easily upon entering. Lesser and greater divine powers? Suzimo was even more puzzled. In the ancient era, when the Kunlun ruins was just formed, more than 10 Mahayana patriarchs and 2 emperors of the primordial races wanted to explore it. The storyteller said, unfortunately, all of them were annihilated. Pissed. Suzimo gasped. In that case, it was no exaggeration that the Kunlun ruins was a forbidden ground for the primordial races. Thereafter, every tens of thousands of years, there would be experts of the primordial races who were indignant and wanted to step into the Kunlun ruins. After all, there were way too many treasures left in the ruins in the primordial war. It was hard to imagine. Suzimo nodded. In the primordial war, many races were destroyed and countless experts died. The treasures left behind by those experts became ownerless. If he could take out all the treasures in the ruins, the foundation of the 9 immortal sects, 8 demon races, 7 fiend sects, and 6 Buddhist monasteries combined might not even be able to compare to it. The storyteller said, however, among the many experts of the primordial races that entered the Kunlun ruins over the years, only one of them managed to survive and was scared half to death. From then on, no primordial race dared to step foot into the ruins. What about Mahayana patriarchs of the human race? Suzimo asked curiously. They can't enter either. The storyteller shook his head and sounded certain. Needless to say, from the ancient era till now, there were definitely countless human patriarchs who entered but failed to return alive. Demoness G thought for a moment and said, since Mahayana patriarchs can't enter, can Dharma-characteristic Tao Lords, or perhaps conjoint body mighty figures enter? Yes. The storyteller nodded. Indeed, for cultivators below the Mahayana realm, they won't trigger a divine power storm upon entering. However, the Kunlun ruins is extremely treacherous with countless dangers. There were indeed cultivators beneath the Mahayana realm that ventured in to explore, and only very few of them returned alive. Furthermore, those people did not even reach the depths of the Kunlun ruins and could not hang on any longer after circling around the outer perimeter. After a moment of silence, the storyteller said, before Founder Master Ling Long entered the Mahayana realm, she braved immense danger to enter the Kunlun ruins for a primordial divine herb. According to the records of Founder Master Ling Long, the Kunlun ruins does not only contain treasures left behind by experts of the past, there are even countless spirit herbs and trees from the primordial era. Of course, apart from that, there are also many races that went extinct in the primordial war. Those living beings mingled and reproduced with one another in the Kunlun ruins. They adapted to the environment and became a new race. Founder Master Ling Long referred to them as the Kunlun race. Suzimo gradually understood. The Kunlun race was not a new race, but a race that was fused with various major races. There might be humans, demon beasts, and even vegetation. The Kunlun ruins was like a place isolated from the outside world. The Kunlun race was the master of that world. They would not leave the Kunlun ruins and were extremely resistant towards the outside world as well. If they discovered any outsiders barging in, they would definitely not let the outsiders off. Desolate, Marshal, the storyteller said in a deep voice. The Kunlun ruins is a unique domain formed by divine powers left behind from the primordial era. Cultivate there for a long time, and the killing badge within your body will definitely dissipate gradually. If you enter the Kunlun ruins, you must be careful and avoid the Kunlun race. Look for a secret and safe place at the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins and cultivate diligently so that you can advance to the Mahayana realm as soon as possible. Suzimo nodded and bowed deeply. Thank you for your guidance, Senior. The reason why Enigma Palace did not have much of an understanding towards the Kunlun ruins was because founder Master Ling Long made a trip there in the past and left behind precious records. After pondering for a moment, Suzimo asked again, Senior, what were the lesser and greater divine powers that you mentioned earlier on? The storyteller smiled gently. You'll know about these things once you advance to the Mahayana realm. However, it doesn't hurt to let you know beforehand. Divine powers can be divided into 3 types, namely lesser, greater, and supreme divine powers. Naturally, the power of those divine powers increase in succession. Suzimo nodded to himself and asked, the divine power that Patriarch Blood Fortune released earlier on, the one that could reconstruct his body with a single drop of blood, what is it under? That's one of the lesser divine powers, the storyteller said indifferently. Suzimo and Demoness G's hearts skipped a beat. Even a powerful method such as blood rebirth was merely a lesser divine power. One could only imagine how frightening the might of a greater or supreme divine power would be. The storyteller said, there are 10,000 known lesser divine powers and thousands of greater divine powers. However, there are only dozens of known supreme divine powers. Under normal circumstances, even the combined power of more than 10 lesser divine powers won't be a match for a single greater divine power. Even 100 greater divine powers combined can't match a single supreme divine power. Although there were only 3 levels of divine powers, the difference in strength was exponential. After a brief pause, the storyteller said hesitantly, of course, Founder Master Ling Long once mentioned that there might perhaps be a type of divine power that was even above supreme divine powers. It's the Peerless divine powers. Peerless meant that no divine powers could compare to it, not even supreme divine powers. Of course, Founder Master Ling Long merely heard of that as well. After all, from the primordial era till now, there had never been any peerless divine powers that appeared. The storyteller smiled. If there was truly such a divine power, even Tianhuang mainland would be turned into ruins if it was released. The saying of peerless divine powers is truly way too illusory. Chapter 1474, 3 Calamities of Daoism. Chapter 1474, 3 Calamities of Daoism. Throughout history, there have been millions of human cultivators and countless conjoint body mighty figures. However, only a rare few manage to advance to the Mahayana realm and comprehend divine powers to become a patriarch. Do you know why? The storyteller asked. Divine power tribulation? Suzimo made an attempt to reply. He had once heard someone mention that in order to advance to the Mahayana realm from the conjoint body realm, one had to undergo a tribulation, the divine power tribulation. Throughout history, this divine power tribulation had buried countless paragons and monster incarnates. The owners of the 30-odd stone statues in the Dao inheritance ground were all the most famous paragons and monster incarnates of Tianhuang mainland in the past. However, these people were still unable to take the final step and were stuck before the Mahayana realm, dying with regrets. The storyteller had a slightly emotional expression as he nodded. Cultivation is something that defies the heavens to begin with. In this period of time, one will experience countless dangers. These dangers either originate from their own mental demons or from the killing intent of the outside world. However, there has never been any danger that can be called a tribulation. Previously, be it in terms of breaking through from golden core, nascent soul, or void reversion realm, one would encounter danger, but it could not be considered as a tribulation. For something to be called a tribulation, it must mean that it was extremely difficult to survive, and one would most likely die. The storyteller said slowly, "The divine power tribulation refers to the three calamities of Daoism: wind, fire, and thunder." Su Zimo's heart stirred. It felt familiar. The storyteller smiled. "Seems like you've thought of the Dao inheritance ground as well?" Su Zimo nodded. There was a three tribulations domain in the Dao inheritance ground, and there were three tribulations: the Wind tribulation, the Karmic Flame tribulation, and the Thunder tribulation. The storyteller said, "Back then, there were many paragons and monster incarnates who left their legacies there. Since three tribulations were created, how could they have been set casually? There was a deeper meaning to it." A look of realization flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. However, the storyteller changed the topic. The three calamities of the divine power tribulation are sent down by heaven and earth and are even more terrifying than the three tribulations domain. That wind is no ordinary wind. It's the heavenly dipper wind, sharp as an awl and lethal as a blade. It enters through the head and spreads through the 5 viscera, 6 bowels, 9 orifices, flesh and hair, destroying everything along its way. The heavenly dipper wind penetrates everything, and if the essence spirit isn't refined enough, it will be dispersed as well. 1. Su Zimo and Demonist G were secretly alarmed. The fire is no ordinary fire either. It's the earth malevolent fire, born from beneath one's feet. It surges right through their glabella. If one's body isn't strong or their bloodline isn't robust enough, their organs would turn into ashes while their limbs would rot instantly. 10,000 years of cultivation would turn into ashes completely. 1. The storyteller continued, that thunder isn't the ordinary thunder of the mortal realm either. It's the 5 elements divine thunder. The Gung metal, wood, Gui water, Bing fire, and Wu earth divine thunders would crash upon one. Any single mistake and their soul would be dispersed. 1. If they can't pass through the 3 calamities, their bodies and essence spirits will be destroyed without any corpse remaining. Of course, if they manage to survive the tribulation of the 3 calamities, they would comprehend a divine power, blood rebirth. Su Zimo finally understood. The reason why every Mahayana patriarch knew blood rebirth was because they could comprehend that divine power through the baptism of the 3 calamities. Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled a doubt he had in the past and could not help but ask, "Senior, Mahayana patriarchs of the cultivation world rarely appear. Are they all in seclusion in the various major sects?" Up till this point of his cultivation, Su Zimo had encountered too few Mahayana patriarchs, which was a little strange. It was as though all the Mahayana patriarchs were hiding in a place and would not come out unless something major happened. When something happened to Enigma Palace this time round, Patriarch Ching Chung seemed like he returned from another place as well. The storyteller said, typically, after entering the Mahayana realm, one would no longer bother about dharmic treasures or secret skills. All Mahayana patriarchs only have a single goal, and that is to comprehend divine powers as much as possible. Once you advance to the Mahayana realm, if you want to raise your cultivation and combat strength, you have to comprehend divine powers. With every divine power comprehended, one's essence spirit, body, and bloodline will be baptized by the power of divine powers, and their combat strength will increase significantly. In the cultivation world, the best place to comprehend divine powers is not in Tianhuang mainland, but at that point, the storyteller suddenly paused and looked at Su Zimo with a fake smile, clearly testing the latter. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. From the tone of the storyteller, this was definitely a place he knew. Furthermore, there was a high chance it was a familiar place. However, why would a place he was familiar with become a place for patriarchs to comprehend divine powers? Suddenly, a thought flashed through Su Zimo's mind as he blurted, "The ancient battlefield." The ancient battlefield was a dimension of its own and was a broken world. Zimo had been to the elementary and intermediate ancient battlefields, but he had never heard any rumors about the advanced ancient battlefield. Now that he thought about it, the place where these patriarchs had the highest chance of comprehending divine powers was the advanced ancient battlefield. Zimo replied, "If I'm not wrong, the final ranking of the 3 Enigma rankings, the divine powers ranking, should also be in this advanced ancient battlefield." "That's right." A look of admiration flashed through the storyteller's eyes as he nodded slightly. There were many divine powers left behind in this final ancient battlefield. Those divine powers could be in some ruins, at some mountain peak, or among the trees and grass. Actually, there are even more divine powers remaining in the Kunlun ruins, and they're even more terrifying. However, because the primordial war was way too intense, and the environment there was extremely sensitive, Mahayana patriarchs would trigger a divine power storm the moment they stepped in. They won't even be able to survive the divine power storm, let alone comprehend the divine powers. Compared to that, the environment of the ancient battlefield is relatively mild. As long as one can discover the remnant of any divine powers, they can comprehend it. Zimo understood. In order to increase their cultivation and combat strength, Mahayana patriarchs of the cultivation world searched and comprehended divine powers in the ancient battlefield. During this process, they would naturally not bother about the strifes of the cultivation world. After all, it was not easy to find a divine power. The process of comprehending a divine power was even harder. That was the reason why patriarchs rarely appeared, and cultivators of the sect would not alarm them unless a major calamity befell the sect. Only Mahayana patriarchs can enter that ancient battlefield? Suddenly, Zimo asked. The storyteller shook his head. That's not a hard rule. However, given your current physical body and essence spirit, you won't be able to withstand a divine power if you forcefully comprehend it. The storyteller saw through Zimo's intentions and knew that the latter wanted to comprehend divine powers as soon as possible and advance to the ancestor realm. However, there were no shortcuts to cultivation. The storyteller said, if you want to comprehend divine powers, your body and essence spirit have to reach a certain level. A grade 7 creation green lotus is definitely not enough. Chapter 1475, Deceive the World. Chapter 1475, Deceive the World. In other words, the old man was implying that Zimo's green lotus true body had to grow to grade 8 if he wanted to enter the advanced ancient battlefield. A grade 8 creation green lotus was extremely difficult to nurture, and in the ancient era, only the Buddha Emperor had it. Even if Zimo were to absorb the large chunk of Ashoka wood completely, it would be difficult for his green lotus true body to transform to grade 8. However, there was still a chance. The creation green lotus had already fused with his body and bloodline. As long as his cultivation increased, the green lotus true body would grow. Although the Kunlun ruins were filled with danger, there were countless treasures. Furthermore, experts of the primordial races did not dare to enter the ruins. As long as he could avoid the danger of the Kunlun ruins, he could cultivate there forever. This was a rare opportunity and cultivation ground for Zimo. You guys can rest here for a few days? The storyteller smiled gently. That divine power of mine can still conceal everything for a few more days. At the very least, you'll be safe in Enigma Palace during this period of time. Senior, what's the name of your divine power? Zimo asked curiously. Deceive the world. The storyteller said slowly, it's a supreme divine power. Ah! Zimo and Demonisji exclaimed. The two of them were fortunate enough to witness a supreme divine power personally and were both shocked and delighted. The storyteller said, there are many types of supreme divine powers, and all of them focus on different aspects. Some of them focus on movement techniques while others on killing. For Deceive the World, it's the #1 method of concealing the heavenly secrets. For example, Everlasting Vitality focuses on healing. Sleeve Universe focuses on encompassing and shifting space. For supreme divine powers such as Incinerating Firmament Boiling Sea, 6 Paths of Reincarnation, Firmament, and Divine Punishment, they lean towards killing. Incinerating Firmament Boiling Sea. Sleeve Universe. 6 Paths of Reincarnation. Suzumo's gaze intensified when he heard that. He was getting closer to these legendary powers. Do you know what's the difference between Mahayana patriarchs and emperors? The storyteller asked again, what sort of patriarchs are able to become emperors? Suzumo exchanged glances with Demoness G, and both of them shook their heads. The comprehension of a supreme divine power. The storyteller said, one can only be conferred the title and become a true emperor upon comprehension of a supreme divine power. Suzumo's eyes revealed a look of realization. It was no wonder why Hermit once said that even emperors were at the Mahayana realm. The reason why a patriarch was referred to as an emperor was because they had comprehended a supreme divine power. The storyteller continued, the reason why there's a difference in strength between emperors is because the focus of the supreme divine powers they comprehend is different. For example, back then, the supreme divine power comprehended by the Dharma Emperor was everlasting vitality, and it was focused on healing. Eventually, he could not defeat the Ancestor Realm Illumination Dragon still. At that point, Suzumo sighed internally. Even the storyteller did not know the truth about what happened at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley back then. The reason why the Dharma Emperor sacrificed his remaining lifespan to save the red-headed ghost was because he did not want a huge battle between the dragon race and the human race to repeat the massacre. Of course, if the difference is merely in the focus of the comprehended divine power, the variation in combat strength won't be too great. The storyteller said, if anyone could comprehend a second, third, or even more supreme divine powers, their combat strength would increase in folds. That's way too difficult. Demoness G shook her head. It was already extremely rare for someone to comprehend a single supreme divine power and become an emperor, let alone 2, 3, or more. There would always be a time when one was exhausted. Even emperors did not have that much time and energy. Suzumo's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly asked, how many supreme divine powers did the eternal human emperor comprehend in the past? Demoness G let out a curious expression as well. 6 of them, the storyteller said slowly. Suzumo and Demoness G were shocked. The storyteller said, ever since the ancient era, there have been many paragons and monster incarnates. Their achievements may even surpass the human emperor. Suzumo nodded. For people like him and the fallen Dein, their accomplishments at the Golden Core realm had already surpassed the human emperor. However, among those monster incarnates, few could become emperors. None of them could even compare to him, let alone surpass him in the end. Suddenly, Demoness G asked, how many supreme divine powers did Fiend Emperor Hatred comprehend in the past? 5. The storyteller said, however, given the Fiend Emperor Hatred's talent, he should have been able to comprehend a 6th one and stand shoulder to shoulder with the human emperor if he hadn't committed suicide. As for the remaining Buddha, Sword, Saber, and Thunder Emperors, they merely comprehended 3 supreme divine powers. Most of the ancient emperors merely comprehended a single supreme divine power. What a stark difference! Suzumo was secretly alarmed. Even for renowned emperors such as the Buddha and Sword Emperors, they were 2 supreme divine powers apart from Fiend Emperor Hatred. The difference between them and the human emperor was even greater. The storyteller said, therefore, without the eternal human emperor, the human race would have definitely lost the ancient war. Legend has it that in the ancient war, the human emperor overturned the entire situation single-handedly. But now, Suzumo knew that the legend was not exaggerated at all. He thought for a moment and asked in a deep voice, what's the max number of supreme divine powers comprehended by the emperors of the human race in this generation? Probably 3. The storyteller sighed gently. Suzumo finally understood the pessimism of the storyteller. The strength of the human race in this generation was truly way too inferior compared to the ancient era. In the ancient war, even with the human emperor, the human race merely secured a tragic victory, let alone this generation. Don't think about such things first. The storyteller looked at Suzumo and said in a deep voice, right now, the most important thing for you is to cultivate as soon as possible and grow further. I understand. Su Zimo nodded. The storyteller left after a few more reminders, and Su Zimo stayed in Enigma Palace temporarily alongside Demoness Ji. Yin Beichen's injuries gradually healed. In a few days, he had mostly recovered. However, the wound in his heart could no longer be healed. His eyes were still dead without any luster. Su Zimo sighed internally. As he had expected, after Yin Beichen killed Heavenly Secrets, he lost the obsession in his heart and could no longer find any hope of surviving. Once he left, Yin Beichen would most probably commit suicide. Su Zimo wanted to console him but realized that he did not know where to start. At that moment, any consolation seemed powerless. After a long silence, Su Zimo said, "Brother Yin, have you ever considered the fact that although it's not present in Tianhuang mainland, there might be a mysterious power in the upper world that could revive fellow Daoist Qin? The reason why I'm in my current state is because of a woman from the upper world who changed my fate for me. Brother Yin, I believe that the power of the upper world can also control life and death. 1. Everyone has to have a goal to survive. My goal is to ascend to the upper world and follow in her footsteps so that I can stand shoulder to shoulder with her." At the mention of that, Su Zimo's gaze was resolute and he seemed to shine. At the side, Demoness Ji pursed her lips and her eyes dimmed momentarily at the sight of that. Everyone has to have a goal to survive? Suddenly, Yin Beichen murmured softly and his eyes flickered. Right then, Lin Xuanji pushed the door open and entered. "Brother Su, you have visitors." Chapter 1476, Peerless Asura. Chapter 1476, Peerless Asura. Visitors? Su Zimo was momentarily stunned. Given how relaxed Lin Xuanji was, it was clear they were not enemies. Right now, he was in an extremely dangerous situation and was hunted down by the primordial 6 races. Unless they were old friends, who would dare to look for him at a time like this? Right then, 2 people appeared at the entrance. When he saw the 2 of them, Su Zimo could not help but laugh. He hurried forward and bowed to one of them with cupped fists. "Greetings, Master." That person was none other than mighty figure Extreme Fire of 100 Refinement Sect. The other person was a young lady in her prime. Her wave-shaped hair fell to her shoulders and was a little withered, but it could not conceal her peerlessly beautiful face. The girl's skin was fair, and her features were exquisite without any flaws. Although she was slightly inferior to Demoness Ji in terms of bewitchment, her appearance was already comparable. Furthermore, her eyes were not ordinary black or white. Instead, they were clear and green, resembling clear water that shimmered with a unique beauty. What a beautiful little girl. She seems to have grown up a little. Even Demoness Ji could not help but exclaim when she saw the girl. "Young master." The girl came to Su Zimo's side and called out with joy in her eyes. This girl was none other than Yin Qi, who possessed half of the god race's bloodline. Su Zimo took her in at the capital of Great Zhou, and she was accepted by Ethereal Peak later on. Su Zimo swept his gaze and nodded slightly. "Not bad. You've already entered the conjoint body realm?" Although Yin Qi was a remnant of the god race, her talent was frighteningly shocking. Her cultivation speed followed closely behind Su Zimo without being left behind. Although the bloodlines of remnants were impure, their accomplishments might not be inferior to others. Monk Daming and the Blood Fiend from 40,000 years ago were both remnant bloodlines. However, even pure-blooded experts of the primordial races would be suppressed by the 2 of them at the same cultivation realm. "Master, why are you guys here together?" Su Zimo asked. Extreme Fire smiled. "When I heard that you were killed by the primordial 6 races, I left 100 Refinement Sect and became a free man. I was prepared to look for you in the South region. However, before I reached the South region, I heard that a huge battle broke out at Enigma Palace. As such, I rushed here right away. Thankfully, you're still here." Although Extreme Fire said it indifferently, Su Zimo's heart was moved. When the primordial 6 races set their killing badges on him, everyone wanted nothing more than to avoid him. Even Dipankara Monastery did not dare to let him into their monastery for fear of being implicated. However, Extreme Fire came to look for him right away. Furthermore, Extreme Fire had already prepared for the worst-case scenario. He was afraid of implicating 100 Refinement Sect, and that was why he left 100 Refinement Sect in advance to regain his freedom. Not long after I arrived here, I encountered this girl. Extreme Fire pointed at Nian Qi and continued. Su Zimo looked at Nian Qi. Nian Qi smiled. I also heard of the news of you being hunted by the primordial 6 races, young master. I wanted to stay by your side and help you. Now that I'm already at the conjoint body realm, Master Crane agreed to let me come over. Master, Nian Qi, you guys sigh. Su Zimo sighed gently, but a warm feeling flowed through his heart. Up till this point of his cultivation, he roamed Tianhuang mainland and made countless enemies. However, he also made many hot-blooded friends and siblings who could stick together. These people were loyal and did not leave him even though they knew he was in a dangerous place. It was the case for Extreme Fire and Yin Qi. It was the case for Yin Beichen and Demonist Ji. It was the same for Little Fatty and Shijian as well. Extreme Fire said in a deep voice, Zimo, it's difficult for you to survive in Tianhuang mainland now that you're hunted by the primordial 6 races. However, there is a place that might offer a chance of survival. Oh. Out of curiosity, Su Zimo asked, where? Extreme Fire replied, the place where I nearly died and obtained Night Spirit, as well as the Illumination Sword formation. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly thought of a possibility. Extreme Fire continued, that's the extreme west of Tianhuang mainland, the Kunlun ruins. Indeed. The divine Hoeg was brought out by Extreme Fire from the Kunlun ruins. That was also a speculation that Su Zimo had just thought of. Extreme Fire had once told him that he was exploring a primordial ruin and nearly died. The Kunlun ruins was probably the most famous and largest primordial ruin in Tianhuang mainland. Most importantly, the Kunlun ruins was the battlefield of the primordial war. This was also closely related to Night Spirit. Ever since the battle at Heaven and Earth Valley, Night Spirit had been separated from him and his whereabouts were unknown. However, Su Zimo believed that Night Spirit would not die that easily. If Night Spirit was still alive, could he be in the Kunlun ruins? Extreme Fire said, I've been to the primordial ruin before after all, and have a slight understanding of it. If we go together, we might have a higher chance of surviving. Su Zimo nodded thoughtfully. To begin with, the Kunlun ruins was a cultivation ground for him. But now that he thought about the high chance that Night Spirit was in the Kunlun ruins, a sense of anticipation grew in his heart. Right then, Yin Beichen suddenly sat up on the couch. Brother Yin, how are you? Su Zimo hurried forward and asked softly. At that moment, Yin Beichen looked a little better. He looked at Su Zimo fixedly and asked once more, Zimo, will the upper world truly have the power to save Pian Ran? I believe there is. Su Zimo nodded. In truth, the dead could not be resurrected. This involved the great Tao of reincarnation, and even he could not be certain. However, at that moment, he could not care less. Right then, the storyteller appeared out of thin air in front of Yin Beichen's couch and said in a deep voice, there are endless secrets in the world. Tianhuang mainland might just be a well. The only way you can see a wider world is if you jump out of this well. Perhaps you might be able to understand the obscurities of life and death in that world. However, if you commit suicide now, you'll never get the chance ever again. The weight of the storyteller's words was much heavier and more trustworthy than Su Zimo's. True enough, gradually, some life force recovered from Yin Beichen's eyes and shone brightly. Su Zimo knew that the storyteller's words had finally reignited Yin Beichen's hope. In the past, revenge was the hope that allowed Yin Beichen to continue surviving. Now, saving Qin Pian Ran would be the hope for Yin Beichen's future. This is the first time I'm seeing the old man persuade others personally. At the side, Lin Xuanji sent a voice transmission secretly to Su Zimo using his spirit consciousness. The storyteller was the current mystic emperor. An emperor was willing to lower his status to persuade Yin Beichen. It was clear how highly the storyteller regarded the latter. The storyteller continued, Asura, you obtained the inheritance of the fiend emperor hatred. However, I believe that you're not another hatred. Leave your own Tao and break free from the effect of the hatred sutra on you. Putting down your obsession. I believe that even though he passed down his legacy, the fiend emperor hatred would not want you to become a second him. You're the Asura, the one and only peerless Asura in this world. Chapter 1477, Entering Kunlun. Chapter 1477, Entering Kunlun. Yin Baichen caressed the hatred fiend's saber beside him and murmured softly, If I'm not hatred, would you still be willing to follow me? Clang, clang. The hatred fiend's saber seemed to be able to understand Yin Baichen's words and buzzed and trembled. It had already decided that Yin Baichen was its master. Be it hatred or the Asura, it would follow Yin Baichen through life and death. All right. Yin Baichen's eyes shone brightly as he said proudly, I, the Asura, will bring you to the upper world to take a look in this generation. I will also defy the heavens and change fate, altering life and death. With that said, he bowed deeply to the storyteller. Thank you, Senior. The storyteller nodded slightly with a delighted expression. Indeed, he thought highly of Yin Baichen. In his heart, Yin Baichen's accomplishments might even be higher than Fiend Emperor Hatred's. Yin Baichen turned to Su Zimo and said in a deep voice, Zimo, I won't be accompanying you on the trip to the Kunlun ruins. You have to be careful. Don't worry, brother. Su Zimo nodded. Yin Baichen had his own Tao. If he followed Su Zimo to the Kunlun ruins, he might feel restricted instead. Now that Yin Baichen was fine, Su Zimo was completely relieved and no longer had to stay in Enigma Palace. Zimo, I. The moment Demoness Ji spoke, Su Zimo understood her intentions. He smiled and shook his head. There's no need for that. You're the pure maiden of this generation. How can you follow me to the Kunlun ruins casually? If Pure Maiden sect finds out about this, I'll probably be hunted down by your experts. Extreme Fire nodded as well. Don't worry. With me and Yin Qi accompanying Zimo, we can look after one another. Master, Yin Qi, don't follow me either. Su Zimo said deeply, the Kunlun ruins is not a good place. There's no need for you guys to accompany me in taking the risk. What are you talking about? Extreme Fire's eyes widened as he patted his storage bag. Don't get ahead of yourself, lad. I've got a treasure map here. I'm heading to the Kunlun ruins for it. Young master, I'm already here. You can't chase me away. Nian Qi pursed her lips and smiled. Su Zimo did not say anything more. The three of them exchanged glances and smiled. There was no longer a need for words. Since he had already decided to leave, Su Zimo did not delay any longer. He bid farewell to Shi Jian and the others one after another and prepared to move. The storyteller said, You still have the killing badge of the Bloodvine race on you. If you leave Enigma Palace, the Bloodvine race will definitely see it. I'll tear through space and lead you guys there directly. As he said that, the storyteller swiped his palm across the void before him. As though it was cut by a sharp blade, a gigantic crack appeared in the void. It was dark and deep within, in wind gusted. With a flick of his sleeves, the storyteller swept Su Zimo, Extreme Fire and Yin Qi up and leaped into the crack. Old man, bring me along. I'll take a look as well. Just as the crack was about to close, Lin Xuanji shouted and tugged at the old storyteller's sleeves, jumping in as well. The world spun. It was a similar sensation as using a major transference talisman. Everything before them was completely dark, and even breathing was difficult. In just a few breaths' time, Su Zimo and the rest felt their bodies lighten and their eyes lit up. They were finally seeing light once more. Although they were on the ground, everyone felt a heavy and repressing feeling in their hearts. Everyone looked over instinctively and could not help but freeze on the spot in shock. In front of everyone were mountain ranges that rose and fell continuously. Some of the mountain ranges were sliced into two as though they had suffered a violent collision. Some of the mountain ranges were mostly destroyed. The vast plains of the mountain ranges were strewn with corpses and bones. It was a shocking sight. Some of the corpses were not rotten and retained their original forms. Their bodies were long and more than 10,000 feet long, looking like coiled divine dragons. It was a dragon skeleton. A divine dragon that was more than 10,000 feet long meant that this was a true ancestor realm divine dragon. At the edge of the Kunlun ruins, everyone caught sight of the corpse of an ancestor realm divine dragon. It was truly hard to imagine how tragic the primordial war was back then. Everyone looked around. There were not only corpses of the dragon race among the bones. There were also corpses of other primordial races, as well as countless unknown living beings that filled the entire mountain ranges. This scene was way too shocking. The aura emitted by the ruins was way too repressing and sinister. If one's Dao heart was not steady, they could break down mentally in such an environment. Extreme Fire looked at the scene before him and sighed gently, as though he recalled something. Back then, more than 10 of us came to explore this treasure trove. To think that I was the only one who survived. One of them had his Dao heart broken not long after he entered the Kunlun ruins. After a brief pause, he sighed once more. Actually, I would have died long ago as well if I hadn't met Zemo. Everything that I've experienced over the years is truly tragic in retrospect. The storyteller looked at the ruins and remained silent for a long time before saying slowly, Zemo, cultivate well in the Kunlun ruins. You don't have to worry about Tianhuang mainland. I'll do my best to deal with the primordial races and buy time for you. Su Zemo nodded. He did not know if he would survive this trip to the Kunlun ruins, and his future was uncertain. Even he did not know if he could return alive, and when he could return to Tianhuang mainland once more. Senior, take care as well. Su Zemo bowed deeply to the storyteller. Brother Su, I'll wait for you to return. Even the cynical Lin Xuanji felt a sense of reluctance at the imminent departure. Su Zemo waved his hand and entered the Kunlun ruins with Extreme Fire and Yin Qi. The three of them walked extremely slowly and surveyed their surroundings with their spirit consciousnesses tensely, afraid that something might happen. The storyteller watched the three of them from outside the Kunlun ruins the entire time and only snapped out of his stupor after their figures vanished. Old man, why have you suddenly become so emotional? Lin Xuanji asked with a frown. He knew the storyteller too well. He could sense the pessimism in the storyteller's heart. Given Brother Su's talent, with the Dragon Phoenix True Body and Green Lotus True Body, the primordial races won't be his match if he grows further. Lin Xuanji was optimistic on the other hand. The storyteller shook his head gently. I'm afraid there's not much time left. If we wait another 10,000 years, I believe that Desolate Marshal will definitely be able to reach the peak and become an existence comparable to the human emperor. However, the conflicts between the primordial races and the cultivation world are increasing and their movements are becoming more frequent. The final battle is about to arrive. Lin Xuanji's heart skipped a beat as he asked, Old man, how long more do you think that will be based on your divination? No more than 100 years at most. The storyteller's voice was heavy. 100 years. Lin Xuanji finally understood why the storyteller was so pessimistic. 100 years was way too short. For cultivators, 100 years was a fleeting duration. It was already not bad if Su Zemo could advance a single minor realm, let alone advance to the Mahayana realm. On the other hand, even if Desolate Marshal was at the Mahayana realm, how could he fight against the experts and emperors of the primordial races? The storyteller murmured softly, We'll do our best and leave it up to fate. Chapter 1478, Malevolent Spirit Fruit. Chapter 1478, Malevolent Spirit Fruit. Kunlun Ruins. The more Su Zemo and the other two advanced, the more alarmed they became and the surrounding environment turned increasingly sinister and spooky. The ruins of the Great Qin Empire were already filled with a rich malevolent aura after 10,000 years. Coupled with the lingering souls, many malevolent ghosts were born. However, compared to the Kunlun ruins, the Great Qin ruins was like a firefly against a bright moon, a drop of water against an ocean. It was a world of a difference. The malevolent aura was so strong that Suzimo and the other two felt uncomfortable. It was not surprising for any vengeful ghost to be born from such a rich malevolent chi throughout history. The blood chi of Suzimo and the other two was strong, and their dermic powers rumbled furiously. Most ghosts and fiends knew that they were strong and did not dare to approach them. However, as they ventured deeper into the Kunlun ruins, a phantom would flash before their eyes from time to time. The blood chi in their bodies was also a great tonic for them. Suddenly, the malevolent aura in front of them surged and swiftly formed a black fog that floated towards the three of them. It wanted to devour them completely. Humph! Extreme Fire harumphed coldly. How dare a mere ghost try and come out to harm others in broad daylight? Before his sentence was finished, he conjured a dermic art and tapped forward. A scarlet flame burst forth and entered the swiveling malevolent black fog instantly. The power of thunder and fire was a strong counter to such sinister objects. Furthermore, Extreme Fire's flare was created from the Scarlet Flame Heart Sutra, and most conjoint body mighty figures could not withstand it. However, the flare merely caused the black fog to pause for a brief moment without causing any ripples. The black fog continued surging towards the three of them. Hee. A shuddering laughter sounded from the black fog. There's no daylight in these ruins. It's always dark here. Swoosh. Right after the voice sounded, an incomparably gigantic skull suddenly appeared from the black fog. The holes in its eyes shone with a bloodthirsty glint as it opened its mouth and devoured the three of them. You must have a death wish. The dermic art in Extreme Fire's hands changed once more and three balls of flames appeared, condensing into Samadhi Dao fire that shot over. The power of the Samadhi Dao fire was more than twice that of the previous flames. The moment the Samadhi Dao fire entered the skull's mouth, it burst into flames, and the black fog surrounding the skull was burned into nothingness. Groar! The skull let out an extremely painful roar. However, no matter how it channeled the malevolent chi, it could not extinguish the Samadhi Dao fire on its body. In just a few breaths, the bones of the skulls crackled from the heat and cracks appeared. If you dare to step into the Kunlun ruins, don't even think about getting out alive. The skull said fiercely, the flames here will definitely attract even more vengeful spirits and malevolent ghosts. Just wait to be devoured. Before its words were finished, the skull exploded and scattered onto the ground, turning into ashes. Extreme Fire sighed gently. Back when our group arrived here, more than half of us were killed by these vengeful spirits and malevolent ghosts. In the end, there were only 3 of us left when we entered the treasure ground. After that, the 3 of them were even more careful and continued forward. Before long, Nian Qi's gaze shifted to a black fruit and her eyes lit up. The fruit was the size of an infant's fist and was black on the outside. However, it shone brightly inside like a large and exquisite bunch of grapes. It's a malevolent spirit fruit, Extreme Fire exclaimed softly. When he saw Suzimo's confusion, Extreme Fire explained, malevolent spirit fruits are extremely rare and can only be born after countless years in a place with rich in malevolent aura. For most cultivators, the malevolent spirit fruit is a poisonous fruit and they will definitely die if they consume it. However, once they advance to the Mahayana realm and experience the malevolent earth fire of the 3 calamities of the divine power tribulation, consuming the malevolent spirit fruit will produce a miraculous effect. The success rate of the tribulation transcendence will increase by at least 30%. There was definitely no such spirit fruit in Tianhuang mainland. That was because the conditions required to nurture a malevolent spirit fruit were way too stringent that even an environment like the Great Qian ruins could not produce one. It was only possible in the Kunlun ruins. As the storyteller had said, danger and opportunities coexisted in the Kunlun ruins. Suzimo did not say anything and merely frowned slightly, looking at the bottom of the malevolent spirit fruit in deep thought. Nian Qi had already walked forward, prepared to pluck the malevolent spirit fruit. Don't move. Watch out. Right then, 2 voices sounded at almost the same time. The first warning came from Su Zimo. The second was an unfamiliar voice. Right then, something weird happened. The ground beneath Nianqi's feet suddenly cracked and a pair of extremely sharp cold lights flashed, slashing towards her. When Nianqi heard Su Zimo's warning, she was long prepared as she leaped up and looked down. Bang! Boom! Boom! From the crack on the ground, a gigantic scarletback centipede that was dozens of feet long slithered out and chomped down on Nianqi, who was in midair. The cultivation of that scarletback centipede was at the perfected conjoint body realm. Even among the 8 demon regions, it was a ferocious beast with terrifying combat strength. Although Nianqi had just advanced to the conjoint body realm, half of her bloodline came from the god race. With a tender shout, she channeled her bloodline and dermic powers as a blinding sword that shone brightly appeared in her palm. Slash! Gripping her sword with both hands, Nianqi slashed down fiercely at the scarletback centipede beneath. Clang! Although the gigantic sword stood on the scarletback centipede, it could not slash its way in and sparks flew instead. Scarletback centipedes loved corrosion. This particular one had cultivated countless years in this ruin, and by now, its shell was invulnerable against weapons, fire, and water. Humph! Nianqi did not panic and dispersed her sword, channeling her bloodline phenomenon right away. An ancient and majestic pyramid appeared in midair with countless living beings prostrating beneath it. Boom! The pyramid crushed down fiercely towards the scarletback centipede. The scarletback centipede lamented. Although its body was not afraid of sharpness, the pyramid carried an extremely terrifying might and crushed it into two with a ton of weight. Black blood splattered everywhere. The black blood in the scarletback centipede's body contained poison that could kill a conjoint body mighty figure with ease. The scarletback centipede opened its mouth and spat out a black poison mist. Thereafter, it swayed its upper half of its body and wanted to burrow into the ground to escape. Nianqi possessed the bloodline of the god race, and the poisonous blood could not close into her body against the surge of her blood qi. Swoosh! Her figure fell, and she charged down instantly. Grabbing one of the scarletback centipede's legs with her bare hands, she yanked it out of the crack in the ground. Among the primordial 9 races, the god race's physique and bloodline were at the peak and were on par with the dragon race. Although the scarletback centipede was massive, it could not compare to Nianqi in terms of strength. After pulling the scarletback centipede out, Nianqi smashed it onto the ground violently. The pyramid descended once more and crushed the scarletback centipede into a meat sludge. That counterattack was extremely sharp and displayed Nianqi's immense capabilities and combat strength. Even Su Zimo nodded to himself when he saw that. Chapter 1479, Dao Attainment of the Skeleton. Chapter 1479, Dao Attainment of the Skeleton. Apart from countless malevolent ghosts, there were also some terrifying living beings in the Kunlun ruins. After killing the scarletback centipede, Nianqi descended and looked in another direction. On the other side stood a white-robed man at the conjoint body realm. He was handsome and had sparkling eyes. Standing not far away, his clothes fluttered and he looked elegant. At that time, when she wanted to pluck the malevolent spirit fruit, 2 voices reminded her. One of them was Su Zimo, and the other was this white-robed man. My gratitude, fellow Daoist. Nianqi cupped her fists towards that person and expressed her thanks. No problem. The white-robed man smiled gently. Pardon me for being bold. By the looks of it, you guys must have just arrived at the Kunlun ruins, right? Yes. Nianqi nodded. There was no need to hide this matter. Su Zimo and Extreme Fire did not speak and merely sized up the white-robed man. The white-robed man said, "There are dangers lurking everywhere in the ruins. There must be powerful, ferocious beasts guarding a treasure like the malevolent spirit fruit. There are also some ferocious beasts that guard the vicinity of certain universal treasures to wait for other living beings to fall into their traps." At that point, the white-robed man's eyes dimmed and his tone turned grim. There were initially 7 of us, but we fell into a trap of a powerful, ferocious beast. I was the only one who escaped death, sigh. When he heard that, Extreme Fire reminisced about the past and felt a sense of sympathy for the white-robed man. However, he was still a little cautious as he probed. Are you also here for this malevolent spirit fruit? I'm here for the malevolent spirit fruit. The white-robed man smiled and looked at Nian Qi, saying honestly, however, this malevolent spirit fruit clearly belongs to this fellow Taoist. Extreme Fire nodded slightly. Of course, in the cultivation world, humans were unpredictable. This was their first time meeting, and no one could guarantee the other party's thoughts with just a few words. Fellow Taoists, I've stayed in the Kunlun ruins for a period of time. I wonder if I can travel with you guys. The white-robed man's eyes were filled with anticipation. This? Extreme Fire was hesitant. Normally speaking, the three of them were familiar with one another and were resistant towards strangers. However, this was the Kunlun ruins. When Extreme Fire heard about this person's encounter, he could not help but recall his past self. If he allowed this person to wander around the Kunlun ruins alone, the latter would most likely be doomed. Should we bring him along? Extreme Fire sent a voice transmission secretly. Given the three of us, we can deal with him easily if he has any evil intention. Nian Qi did not object and merely looked at Su Zimo. In her heart, Su Zimo would be the one to decide for such matters. Ever since the white-robed man appeared, Su Zimo had not said anything. Suddenly, he asked, "How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" "I'm Spirit Scar." The white-robed man smiled gently. Su Zimo nodded. "I'm Desolate Marshal." "Greetings, fellow Taoist Desolate Marshal." The white-robed man cupped his fists towards Su Zimo. Although their conversation was simple, Extreme Fire and Nian Qi's expressions changed slightly. Both of them could tell that something was amiss. The white-robed man was way too calm when he heard the name Desolate Marshal. Su Zimo's gaze was dark as he asked with a fake smile, "Seems like you've never heard of me, fellow Taoist?" The white-robed man smiled apologetically. "I'm an itinerant cultivator that cultivates in seclusion most of the time. I don't know much about the cultivation world and am inexperienced. I must be quite a joke to you, fellow Taoist." That explanation made sense. However, Extreme Fire and Nian Qi were already wary. Desolate Marshal established his Tao and imparted martial arts to all living beings, shocking the world. Even itinerant cultivators who were in seclusion all year round and were isolated from the world could not have not heard of Desolate Marshal's name. Su Zimo smiled as well and asked, "How long more are you going to pretend for?" The smile on the white-robed man's face did not fade and his expression turned odd. A sinister aura emanated from him as he rubbed his palms and laughed. "Impressive. In all these years, there have been many cultivators who entered the Kunlun ruins, but you're the first to see through my disguise." Both Extreme Fire and Nian Qi felt their scalps tingle. Even though the white-robed man was exposed by Su Zimo, the two of them could not make out what he was still. If they had truly allowed this person to travel with them, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Actually, even Su Zimo could not see through this person's true body. However, after the white-robed man appeared, Su Zimo's spirit perception warned him repeatedly, and that was why he tested the waters. "Let's see what you are." Su Zimo did not waste his breath on the white-robed man and flicked his finger. Qi! A blinding white sword Qi burst forth and arrived before the white-robed man instantly. The sharpness of the heaven-slaying sword Qi caused the white-robed man's expression to change slightly. Swash! The white-robed man swayed and disappeared before Su Zimo and the other two, shifting to the other side at an astonishing speed. Even Extreme Fire's gaze could not catch up to him. The white-robed man's figure reappeared with a gash on his cheek that was oozing with blood and a nauseating stench. Although the white-robed man dodged extremely quickly, his cheek was still sliced by the heaven-slaying sword Qi. So, a skeleton attained the Tao and even managed to grow flesh and blood. Sneering coldly, Su Zimo strode forward and closed two fingers, waving and slashing towards the white-robed man. "Tsk, tsk, tsk." More than 10 heaven-slaying sword Qi burst forth, and tore in different directions towards the white-robed man. Sensing danger, the white-robed man suddenly shrieked. The flesh on his body suddenly dissipated, turning into streams of thick, malevolent chi that condensed into malevolent spears that charged towards the heaven-slaying sword chi. The white-robed man was left with nothing but a skeleton as he stood on the spot. The skeleton was evidently strange, as though it was pieced together from various bones. There were dragon bones, golden crow bones, and even bones of the god race. The skeleton first used the corpses in the Kunlun ruins to piece together a body of bones. After obtaining the Dao, it used malevolent chi to condense the flesh. If the skeleton were to continue cultivating, it would be no different from a true cultivator. Clang, clang, clang. The malevolent spears released by the skeleton collided with the heaven-slaying sword chi and were not disadvantaged. An ear-piercing sound of collision could be heard. The skeleton already had the cultivation of a half-martial ancestor. Su Zimo's gaze intensified as he strode forward and conjured hand seals with both hands, chanting Sanskrit, Om, Ma, Inai, Pa, Mi, Hom. The moment the 6 words of daming mantra were released, 6 daming dharmic seals descended at the same time. Dharmic arts of the Buddhist monasteries were the most lethal for the skeleton. When the Great Vajra Wheel and Great Mount Meru seals descended, the skeleton shuddered and its bones creaked as though they were about to fall apart. Su Zimo sat down and clasped his palms together. He lowered his head like an accomplished monk and recited a series of incantations with a dignified expression. The Great Light Mantra, the Auditory Release Mantra, the Sensory Enigma Mantra, the 6 Paths Diamond Mantra, all of those incantations were used to free the dead and purify their grievances. A ball of In's spirit struggled endlessly from the glabella of the skeleton. However, it gradually could not withstand the consecutive incantations and was eventually extinguished. Swoosh! The skeleton scattered to the ground, returning to dust. Chapter 1480, Kunlun Barrier. Chapter 1480, Kunlun Barrier. Although the skeleton malevolent ghost seemed like he was suppressed by Su Zimo with ease, in reality, his cultivation was top-tier even in Tianhuang mainland. Neither extreme fire nor Nian Qi were its match. If Su Zimo did not have the support of the cultivation techniques of the Buddhist monasteries, he would have to spend a lot of effort to suppress the skeleton completely. Let's go. Be careful, Su Zimo said, and the 3 of them continued forward. The 3 of them walked through the Kunlun ruins for an entire day and encountered countless battles along the way. Thankfully, they got out unharmed. The existences in the Kunlun ruins did not care what sort of paragons or monster incarnates they were. They did not know Desolate Martial at all. In their eyes, Su Zimo and the other 2 were nothing but fresh meat that could be consumed and be of great help to their cultivation. Even with Su Zimo's immense stamina, he was tired after battling for an entire day. Extreme Fire and Yin Qi were even more exhausted and their faces turned pale. Where are we now? Su Zimo had just killed a pure-blooded ferocious beast when he stopped in his tracks and asked. Extreme Fire panted slightly. We're still at the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins. The Kunlun ruins was way too huge. The 3 of them had walked for an entire day and were still lingering around the outer perimeter. Look over there. Extreme Fire pointed to the purple-gold light in the distance and said in a deep voice, That's the Kunlun barrier. You only truly get to the core of the Kunlun ruins after entering that barrier. However, with the existence of the Kunlun barrier, cultivators outside can't enter at all. Over the years, some cultivators who enter the Kunlun ruins to search for opportunities have merely loitered around the outer perimeter. Su Zimo gazed at the aurora-like light in the distance thoughtfully. Let's go take a look, he said, and led the way with Extreme Fire and Yin Qi right behind. Both of them consumed elixirs while recovering their blood qi and stamina. The Kunlun barrier did not seem like it was far. However, Su Zimo and the other 2 walked for another 3 days before they truly arrived at the foot of the Kunlun barrier. Naturally, the journey was another massacre. All three of them were the strongest paragons of the conjoint body realm. Given Su Zimo's current cultivation, the living beings and malevolent ghosts at the outer perimeter of the Kunlun ruins were even less of a threat to him. Half-martial ancestor Qing Zhe of Enigma Palace had once said that Desolate martial status was already established, and no one could threaten him unless a patriarch attacked. He was not exaggerating at all. Su Zimo looked at the Kunlun barrier before him. As long as he passed through this barrier, he would be able to come into contact with the true secrets of the Kunlun ruins and see another world and the legendary Kunlun race. The power of the barrier was extremely mysterious and cold. Extreme Fire led the way and attempted to cross the Kunlun barrier. The moment his body touched the barrier, it met with immense resistance. Although he pushed his bloodline to its limits, he could not cross it. After a moment of stalemate, Extreme Fire could only retreat. "I still can't do it." Extreme Fire laughed bitterly. "Back then, I tried it. To think that I still can't cross it after entering the conjoint body realm. Let me try to," Su Zimo said as he walked towards the Kunlun barrier. The moment he touched the barrier, he felt a tremendous resistance as well. Su Zimo channeled his bloodline slowly, and the sound of a tsunami burst forth from his body. His green lotus true body exuded a divine light, and his organs shone brightly. Against the obstruction of the barrier, the green lotus true body turned transparent and transformed into the shape of a creation green lotus. Under the gazes of Extreme Fire and Yin Qi, Su Zimo's figure gradually entered the Kunlun barrier and vanished. He managed to get in? Extreme Fire's eyes were widened in disbelief. "Probably." Yin Qi nodded. The two of them waited silently, and not long after, Su Zimo's figure appeared once more, and he walked back from the Kunlun barrier. "How is it?" Extreme Fire asked hurriedly. "I crossed it," Su Zimo said in a deep voice. "This Kunlun barrier is two-way. Not only can it prevent cultivators from entering, it's also impossible for living beings inside to come out." "No wonder," Extreme Fire murmured softly. "For so many years, there has never been a Kunlun race being in Tianhuang mainland because of this Kunlun barrier. Mahayana patriarchs could naturally pass through this barrier with their power. However, none of them dared to come for fear of triggering a divine power storm that might result in death. As for half-martial ancestor experts and conjoint body mighty figures, none of them could pass through the Kunlun barrier. The Kunlun barrier isolated the Kunlun ruins from Tianhuang mainland completely, forming two different worlds. There was a huge reason why the Kunlun ruins was so mysterious, and nobody had been able to unveil it for so many years. "Let me try to." After Su Zimo and Extreme Fire tried it, Yin Qi was eager as well and walked forward, heading towards the Kunlun barrier. However, the moment Yin Qi touched the Kunlun barrier, a change happened. A blinding light burst forth from the Kunlun barrier. As though a gigantic rock was tossed into the middle of a lake, massive waves were created on the calm barrier. An extremely terrifying power burst forth from the Kunlun barrier and smashed towards Yin Qi. That power was so terrifying that even Su Zimo's expression changed slightly. Boom! Caught off guard, Yin Qi was struck in the chest by the power of the Kunlun barrier, and the bones in her chest shattered instantly. The bloodline of the god race was extremely strong. However, Yin Qi's body was almost torn apart by the impact of the Kunlun barrier. Everything had happened too quickly. Even Su Zimo was unprepared and could not react in time. Yin Qi fell out with a pale expression and spat out a huge mouthful of blood. Her organs were ruptured. Swoosh! As though it was sentient, the Kunlun barrier gathered its strength once more upon realizing that Yin Qi was not dead. A gigantic, menacing claw appeared in midair and grabbed towards Yin Qi. Frowning slightly, Su Zimo's figure flashed and he grabbed Yin Qi. Turning into a golden streak of light, he retreated rapidly and fled far from the Kunlun barrier. As the distance between them increased, the menacing claw could not hold on any longer and dissipated gradually. The Kunlun barrier returned to normal once more, as though everything that happened earlier was an illusion. How could this be? Extreme Fire chased over with a bewildered expression. Both Suzimo and he merely encountered resistance when they tried to cross the Kunlun barrier. However, Nian Qi nearly lost her life. Suzimo fed Nian Qi an elixir before asking with a frown, "Who set up this barrier?" "I'm not sure." Extreme Fire shook his head. Even Enigma Palace might not know the origin of that Kunlun barrier, let alone him. Suzimo's gaze flickered. Recalling that menacing claw earlier on, he had a vague guess. He was extremely familiar with that claw. That was the claw that Night Spirit would only reveal when he reverted to his true form. If this Kunlun barrier had existed for countless years, it meant that there was a high chance it was set up by the Ho of the primordial era. If that was the case, new doubts would arise. What was the use of that barrier? Why was there such a huge reaction when Nian Qi tried to cross the Kunlun barrier? A killing intent from it was triggered. This could not be a coincidence. It must be some sort of will left behind by the primordial Ho that caused such a change to the Kunlun barrier. Chapter 1481, Secret Ground. Chapter 1481, Secret Ground. What should we do now? Extreme Fire asked. Suzimo said deeply, "This can't continue. We've got to find a safe and quiet place to cultivate for a few days in peace." They roamed the Kunlun ruins and fought the entire time. Although they had accumulated quite a bit of comprehension, there was no end to it. They did not have the opportunity or time to consolidate those comprehensions either. Furthermore, Nian Qi was severely injured right now and could not move much. Even with her God race bloodline and immense regeneration capabilities, it would take at least half a month of recuperation for her injuries to heal. "I do know of a place where malevolent ghosts won't barge in," Extreme Fire said in a deep voice, "the secret ground I entered 5,000 years ago. I obtained Night Spirit and the Illumination Sword formation from that secret ground." "All right, let's head there and recuperate for a period of time." Suzimo made up his mind. Firstly, Nian Qi could recuperate in peace. Secondly, they had gained quite a bit of comprehension during the past few days of the battle. If they were to seize the opportunity to cultivate and settle down, their cultivation and combat strength would increase significantly. For Suzimo, he could also make use of this opportunity to refine the large chunk of Ashoka wood in his storage bag. At that time, the three of them would have a breakthrough in their combat strength, and it would be safer for them to explore the Kunlun ruins once more. Extreme Fire took out a map from his storage bag and matched it. "That's not far from here. Follow me," he said and led the way. Suzimo carried Nian Qi on his back and followed closely behind. Every step in the Kunlun ruins was treacherous. The three of them did not move fast, and another half a day passed before they arrived at their destination. Before them was a towering mountain peak. The mountain peak was filled with strange rocks and barren land without any signs of life. Extreme Fire brought the two of them into a cave at the foot of the mountain. There were countless karst holes in the cave, and one could not identify the direction at first glance. "Follow me closely. Don't get lost," Extreme Fire reminded, and followed the map in his hands closely into a karst hole. There were many fork roads in this cave. Extreme Fire often changed directions and walked towards one of the forked roads. From time to time, it would head left and head right without any pattern. A long time later, Extreme Fire stopped in his tracks. Suzimo looked over. Before them was another extremely long tunnel with no end in sight. Within it, there were many corpses strewn all over the ground with weapons scattered all over. Suzimo swept his gaze. Through the dermic weapons on the ground, he could deduce that most of the corpses belonged to the Dharma characteristic realm, and some of them were conjoint body mighty figures, or even half-martial ancestor experts. The experts had died for a long time, and their bodies were covered in dust. Even for the conjoint body mighty figures and half-martial ancestor experts with their indestructible bodies, they were left with nothing but empty bones and clothes. Some of the corpses were humanoid, some were ferocious beasts and demons. There were all sorts. However, every single corpse had a purple gold ribbon tied around them. Kunlun race. Su Zimo murmured softly. He had a vague guess, but he did not dare to confirm it. The passage and the extremely complicated karst hole outside were clearly man-made. If one did not know the way, they would not be able to enter or leave. He wondered who the owner of this secret ground was. What was the motive for it? He did not know what happened back then to cause so many people to die here. Master, this is where you got poisoned back then? Su Zimo asked. After he entered, he had already released his spirit consciousness and scanned his surroundings. However, he could not discover any other living beings or danger. Extreme Fire nodded and looked at the storage bag beside one of the corpses, sighing. Back when I came here and saw so many treasures on the ground, I was naturally tempted. One could imagine how Extreme Fire, who was still a Dharma characteristic Tao Lord back then, was naturally emotional when he saw so many dharmic weapons and storage bags left behind by mighty figures. He pointed at the corpse. When I saw that there was no danger around, I went forward and wanted to open this storage bag to take a look. To think that the moment this storage bag opened, a goo worm ran out and bit me. That single attack nearly buried me here. Su Zimo's gaze shifted, and not far away, he discovered the corpse of a goo worm. Without the need for Extreme Fire to take revenge, the goo worm had already died a long time ago without its master's care. Extreme Fire reminisced with a sense of trepidation. At that time, I felt my head spin and crushed the transference talisman in my hands without hesitation. At the same time, I waved my sleeves and collected the items that fell out of the storage bag. Thereafter, I fell into the spatial tunnel and was teleported to the Tsonglang mountain range of the North region. Later on, Extreme Fire used his remnant consciousness to open up a cave abode there and fought against the poison for 5,000 years before meeting Su Zimo and surviving. In hindsight, everything could only be described as a freak coincidence. Extreme Fire still felt emotional when he recalled the past. In that case, Night Spirit, the Illumination Stone and Illumination Sword formation fell from that storage bag? Su Zimo asked. No. Extreme Fire shook his head. When I opened that storage bag, there were indeed many items that fell out. There was the Illumination Stone and the Illumination Sword formation, but Night Spirit's egg wasn't there. At the mention of that, Extreme Fire seemed to be immersed in his memories and frowned. At that time, my vision was already a little blurry. I felt as though Night Spirit's egg had rolled over from the tunnel and leaped into the dimensional tear formed by the transference talisman to teleport out with me. Su Zimo's heart stirred. If Extreme Fire was not wrong, it would mean that he was not the one who brought Night Spirit out. Instead, Night Spirit was sentient and chose Extreme Fire to leave the Kunlun ruins with the latter's help. That was not impossible. Back in the depths of Baiming Town, the Kuan Pong egg hatched in the primordial divine spring possessed intelligence not weaker than an adult and had many complicated emotions. That Kuan Pong egg could even sense how terrifying the martial Tao prime body was. Back then, Night Spirit was only an egg. Why was it in this secret ground? Why would Night Spirit choose Extreme Fire and leave the Kunlun ruins? Su Zimo had a feeling that if he were to explore this secret ground once more, there was a high chance he would obtain the answer he wanted. Right then, Nian Qi let out a drowsy sound on Su Zimo's back. There's no need to hurry and explore this secret ground, Su Zimo said deeply. We'll cultivate here first, and it won't be too late to explore this secret ground after we break through. All right. Extreme Fire nodded in agreement as well. On both sides of the passage were many secret chambers. Su Zimo and the other two arrived at the closest secret chamber and entered to cultivate in seclusion. Chapter 1482, Rakshasa Yu. Chapter 1482, Rakshasa Yu. 1. Time was non-existent in the mountains and cultivation was endless. It had been 20 years since Su Zimo entered the Kunlun ruins. In the past 20 years, there had been many changes in Tianhuang mainland as well. Apart from the dragon, Kurin, and barbarian races, the movements of the primordial six races became increasingly frequent as more of them appeared on Tianhuang mainland to expand their territories. For the past 20 years, countless small sects and factions had been annexed by the primordial six races. There were even more cultivators that died. Right now, the primordial six races were still restraining themselves and had not clashed head-on with the super sections. Although there were occasional conflicts, things were left unsettled. For the past 20 years, the primordial six races had not relaxed at all in their search for Su Zimo. However, no matter how they searched, they could not find Su Zimo. It was as though Su Zimo had vanished from Tianhuang mainland. Chaos Essence Sect. Defan sat in the cave abode with a row of disciples under his charge. They had just returned from the 4 regions, 3 oceans, and 1 continent of Tianhuang mainland and were travel-worn. There's still no news of Desolate Marshal? Defan asked with a frown. No. One of the disciples said in a deep voice. Ever since Desolate Marshal appeared outside Enigma Palace, he seemed to have vanished without a trace. In fact, I suspect that Desolate Marshal might have already died. Humph. Defan harumphed coldly and glared at the disciple, scaring the latter so much that he shrank his neck and shuddered. Who is Desolate Marshal? Defan said coldly. If he was someone who would die so easily, how could he have escaped twice from my hands? The other disciples reported news one after another as well, but none of them could spot any traces of Desolate Marshal. Master, a cultivator said in a deep voice, pardon me for being blunt. From the information obtained from the battle at Enigma Palace, Desolate Marshal's Green Lotus true body has transformed completely. His combat strength is even comparable to a half-martial ancestor. If there's truly news of him, you can't be overly careless. Foo-foo. Defan sneered. What do you know? Initially, I wanted to make a move myself, but now that the primordial six races have set down their killing badges, there's no longer a need for me to do it personally. All I have to do is obtain news of Desolate Marshal as soon as possible. Once I spread them, experts of the primordial six races will naturally kill him. With a blade as sharp as the primordial six races, wouldn't it be a waste not to make use of it? A disciple pondered for a moment, and his eyes darted around. Suddenly, he said, Master, I have a plan that isn't gentlemanly. However, if this plan works, Desolate Marshal will definitely appear. Oh. Defan raised his brow slightly and asked, Tell me about it. The disciple smiled gently. I heard that Desolate Marshal is extremely loyal and sentimental. He came from the North region's Ethereal Peak. If we head to Ethereal Peak, suppress their cultivators and spread the news, Desolate Marshal will definitely show up once he hears about it. Defan's eyes lit up as he murmured thoughtfully, We can give this method a try. North region. I can invite fellow Daoist Chen Yu of Glass Palace, as well as fellow Daoist Diju of Sword Sect, to take a look around Ethereal Peak. At that thought, Defan took out a few spirit cranes from his storage bag and wrote a message, scattering the messenger cranes to the super sects such as Glass Palace and Sword Sect. North region. This day, 2 people arrived in the vicinity of Tsonglang mountain range. The man and woman were both at the conjoint body realm. The man was tall and wore a huge hood that concealed his face completely. The woman looked no different from a human. She had a slim, curvaceous figure and her legs were exposed, slender and long. Her skin was as fair as snow and her face was extremely beautiful. Anyone who saw that face and figure would be stunned. Hey Tua, why did you mysteriously bring me here? The woman frowned slightly and asked. Her voice was extremely pleasant as well. The man named Hey Tua chuckled and said, Young mistress, you don't know. The place I brought you here today has something to do with Desolate Marshal. Hey Tua's voice was hoarse and unpleasant. Oh. The woman raised her brow slightly with an interested expression. If anyone from the primordial six races were here, they would be able to recognize the 2 of them. Both of them were from the Rakshasa race. The man's name was Rakshasa Hey Tua. That woman was the most famous monster incarnate of the Rakshasa race in this generation, Rakshasa Yu. The Rakshasa race was extremely mysterious. The men were extremely ugly with green faces and bared fangs, resembling malevolent ghosts. However, the women were extremely beautiful. They were not inferior to the fairies of the 9 heavens. Rakshasa Yu was not only peerless among her peers in the Rakshasa race, her appearance was also unparalleled. Young mistress, look over there. Rakshasa Yu pointed to a place not far away where the peach blossom trees were the most lush. There's a town there called Pingyang Town. I see it. Rakshasa Yu nodded and sensed with her eyes closed. There's nothing special about this town. It's just a group of humans with slightly longer lifespans. Oh, there's also a peach blossom tree that gained sentience and became a demon. However, that's nothing much as well. In the blink of an eye, Rakshasa Yu scanned Pingyang Town from head to toe. Young mistress, you don't understand. Rakshasa Yu said smugly, I've already investigated. Pingyang Town was the place of Desolate Martial's rise. I heard that this was the town where he obtained the Tao and appeared out of thin air. So? Rakshasa Yu was indifferent. Desolate Martial's old friends of the past have already passed away. What has Pingyang Town got to do with him? Young mistress, I heard that Desolate Martial is extremely sentimental and has returned to Pingyang Town countless times. Rakshasa Yu said, this town is preserved so well despite the chaotic era right now. Desolate Martial must have played a huge role in that fact. Since we can't find Desolate Martial, why don't we eat everyone in this town? We can vent our hatred as well. Rakshasa Yu's tone turned excited at the mention of eating people. Beneath the dark hood, a grisly red tongue stuck out and licked its lips. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly in resistance. They're just mortals. What's there to eat? Young mistress, why have you become so benevolent? Rakshasa Yu asked. If I really want to eat, I'll eat some experts of the human race. What's the use of eating these mortals? Rakshasa Yu sneered. So what? Rakshasa Yu pouted. Since we're already here, we can't return empty-handed. We've got to fill our stomachs no matter what. Young mistress, don't worry. I'll definitely leave that conjoint body peach blossom tree demon for you. Just as the two of them were chatting in Songlang Mountain Range, two divine lights lit up in a dark room in the Su family's residence in Pingyang Town. A purple-robed cultivator floated down from the couch with a burning gaze. Smiling gently, he murmured, to think that you would harbor designs on Pingyang Town. 1. Chapter 1483. Who were you calling an ant? Chapter 1483. Who were you calling an ant? Su residence. The door to the room opened. A tender and naive boy walked in. When he saw the martial Tao prime body, he pouted his lips slightly. Young master, two people have arrived over there. The aura they exude is extremely annoying. Tao Yao had gained sentience through Dai Yu, and his cultivation speed was extremely fast. Right now, he was already at the conjoint body realm. The cultivation of the martial Tao prime body was at the perfected Dharma characteristic realm. 1. That cultivation speed was already rather terrifying. 20 years ago, when he headed to the south region, he had only just entered the Dharma characteristic realm. Young master, continue cultivating. I'll chase those two away. Tao Yao raised his fist. Come back? The martial Tao prime body shook his head gently. You're not their match. Tao Yao was slightly stunned. Actually, Tao Yao was extremely strong. Back when he was at the Dharma characteristic realm, he could even suppress Monkey, the spirit tiger, and the others. However, Tao Yao had a pure heart. Up till this point of his cultivation, he had never killed or injured any living being. He did not wish to kill either. That was Tao Yao's conviction. He did not like the fighting and killing of the cultivation world. What he yearned for the most was the peaceful life in Pingyang Town. However, the two people who came today were definitely not kind souls. The Rakshasa race was the most violent and bloodthirsty. If it was just a spar, Tao Yao might be able to defeat the two of them. However, if it was a life and death battle, Tao Yao would definitely die. Young master, what should we do then? Tao Yao turned nervous. No worries. The martial Tao prime body smiled gently. I'll take care of it. Help me brew a pot of tea. All right. Tao Yao agreed crisply and turned to prepare tea. The martial Dao prime body arrived in the courtyard and sat on a stone stool, waiting for the intruders to arrive. Pingyang Town. Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Yu were extremely fast and arrived above Pingyang Town before long. The two of them stood in the air and attracted countless gazes the moment they appeared. Pingyang Town seemed to have gone silent instantly. However, in the blink of an eye, the pedestrians on the streets continued forward. The crowd was bustling with activity. The mortals that saw them merely looked surprised, but did not have much of a reaction. The clamor and bustle of Pingyang Town returned before long. Rakshasa Yu's expression darkened. That feeling made him extremely displeased. As a Rakshasa of the primordial races, even human cultivators were nothing but food for him. In their expedition this time round, they encountered many cultivators. All the cultivators were scared out of their wits by the two of them. However, the mortals before them dared to ignore them. Rakshasa Yu felt as though he had been severely humiliated. With a cold sneer, he suddenly removed his hood, revealing an extremely ugly and menacing face. He had a green face with bared fangs, and his nose faced the skies like a malevolent ghost from hell. There were sharp nails on his fingers and toes. That was not all. Shing! Rakshasa Yu broke free of his black robes and revealed his complete form. A pair of pitch-black meat wings grew from his back with sharp spikes that shone coldly. He flapped his massive meat wings and emanated a sinister and bloody killing intent. As he surveyed the many mortals of Pingyang Town, he stuck out his grisly red tongue and smacked his lips. True enough, a commotion broke out in the crowd. Many women exclaimed in shock when they saw such a monster. Some of them even fled home and closed their doors. Some of the children were even bawling in fear. In a courtyard, a child around 5 or 6 years old threw himself into the arms of an old man who was sitting on a bench and basking in the sun, not daring to look up. When Rakshasa Yu saw that, he felt slightly better and his eyes shone with excitement. His favorite thing was to see those ants panic, fear, and shout in front of him. "Child, don't be afraid." The old man was extremely calm and smiled as he patted the child on the back, comforting the latter. "These are just some reckless little monsters. It's nothing much." What? Rakshasa Yu was stunned for a moment. Up till this point of his cultivation, this was the first time he had heard someone describe the Rakshasa race as little monsters. Furthermore, to his surprise, even after he revealed his true form, Pingyang Town was not in a complete mess. After a slight commotion, everything gradually returned to normal. Nobody cared about him at all. Actually, Pingyang Town had experienced countless storms over the years. However, it was always safe and sound under the protection of Tao Yao and the martial Dao prime body. It was especially so for the older generation of Pingyang Town. They were no longer surprised by such things. In their hearts, these fiend demons could not cause any trouble in Pingyang Town with second young Master Su around. "Ants like you don't know what's good for you." Rakshasa Yu glared at the old man in the courtyard with widened eyes and opened his mouth, wanting to devour both of them. Suddenly, at the side, Rakshasa Yu frowned and said, "Something's not right. What's wrong?" Rakshasa Yu asked instinctively. Rakshasa Yu pointed to an unassuming courtyard in Pingyang Town and said sternly, "There's a person in there. It's a Dharma-characteristic Dao Lord." Rakshasa Yu swept his gaze across. In the courtyard, a purple-robed cultivator sat facing them and sipped tea leisurely with an indifferent expression. Behind the purple-robed cultivator stood a pink and tender boy who looked very obedient. It was the peach blossom tree demon they had discovered. "That person looks familiar." Rakshasa Yu looked at the side profile of the purple-robed cultivator but could not remember where she saw him from. "He's only at the Dharma characteristic realm. What's wrong?" Rakshasa Yu frowned. "Young mistress, aren't you making a fuss out of nothing?" Rakshasa Yu continued frowning. "However, when my spirit consciousness searched Pingyang Town earlier on, I did not discover that person's existence. In other words, that person can hide from my spirit consciousness detection." Haha. Rakshasa Yu roared in laughter. Young mistress, you're thinking too much. It's just a Dharma characteristic, Tao Lord. Even if Desolate Marshal is here, so what? Young mistress, watch me attack and suppress that ant. In a flash, Rakshasa Yu arrived in the skies above the residence right away. Rakshasa Yu was puzzled and followed closely behind. Right then, the purple-robed cultivator in the courtyard turned around and looked at Rakshasa Yu in midair, asking indifferently, "Who were you calling an ant?" "You." Rakshasa Yu's pupils constricted when she caught sight of the purple-robed cultivator's face. That person's face was identical to the drawing of the person she had seen in the Rakshasa race. However, the person in the drawing had green robes and black hair. As for this person, he wore purple robes and exuded an indescribable might and weight. Even she felt shudders. Desolate Marshal? Rakshasa Yu exclaimed with disbelief in her beautiful eyes. Chapter 1484, 800 Feet. Chapter 1484, 800 Feet. When Rakshasa Yu heard the words Desolate Marshal, he was stunned for a moment as well before reacting. He's definitely not Desolate Marshal. Rakshasa Yu sneered. Everyone knows that Desolate Marshal has already entered the conjoint body realm. I reckon that this is merely a clone of Desolate Marshal. Rakshasa Yu nodded as well. That was the most logical explanation. Typically, if cultivators cultivated cloning techniques, their cultivation realms would be lower than their prime bodies, and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. Initially, I merely wanted to explore Pingyang Town and eat some small fries. To think that I would catch a big fish here. Rakshasa Yu grinned. Desolate Marshal, you're merely a Dharma characteristic clone. How dare you go against me? Even if your prime body comes, I'll rip him apart. Rakshasa Yu said indifferently, I've long heard that Desolate Marshal has a Dragon Phoenix clone. To think that you have a third clone. Since your prime body is hiding, I'll destroy your clone today. Initially, Rakshasa Yu was not interested in Pingyang Town. However, since Desolate Marshal's clone was discovered, their trip was not wasted. The Marshal Dao prime body had an indifferent expression. Indeed, I cultivate a cloning technique. However, you guys are wrong about one thing. Oh. Rakshasa Yu raised her brow. The Marshal Dao prime body said slowly, to be precise, the Dragon Phoenix body and Green Lotus body are both my clones. What you're seeing now is my prime body. Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Yu were slightly stunned. Ha 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 ha. Immediately, Rakshasa Yu burst into laughter. Desolate Marshal, oh Desolate Marshal, do you think I'll believe such nonsense? A Dharma characteristic prime body? I can crush you with a single finger. Is that so? The Marshal Dao prime body drank the hot tea in his cup and stood up slowly. An extremely terrifying aura burst forth from the Marshal Dao prime body. Although it was just a simple motion of rising, it affected the world. Instantly, the void trembled. Suddenly, a phantom appeared behind the Marshal Dao prime body and soared into the skies. A heaven and earth Dharma characteristic. Back in the North Sea, even when the Marshal Dao prime body fought against 3 conjoint body grand demons, he did not use his heaven and earth Dharma characteristic. That was because there was no need for that. However, it was different now. Although the two of them were both at the conjoint body realm, they were from the Rakshasa race, one of the primordial races. One of them was even the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. Her combat strength was so terrifying that she could kill human half-martial ancestors with ease. Foo-foo. Rakshasa Yu sneered. How dare you take out a technique like a heaven and earth Dharma characteristic? Even a supreme Dharma characteristic won't be able to defend against a single punch from me. Rakshasa Yu did not laugh. She felt a shuddering aura from the Dharma characteristic that was rising rapidly. How was that possible? How could a mere heaven and earth Dharma characteristic threaten her? 90 feet. In the blink of an eye, the heaven and earth Dharma characteristic of the Marshal Dao prime body had already climbed to a height of 90 feet. However, the heaven and earth Dharma characteristic was still growing rapidly without any signs of stopping. Could Desolate Martial's Dharma characteristic have also been cultivated to a height of 99 feet? Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. Back in the Battle of Heaven and Earth Valley, the Green Lotus True Body had once used a 99 feet tall Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic to kill a conjoint body mighty figure of the primordial races. Of course, Rakshasa Yu was fearless. Although the 99 feet tall Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic was troublesome to deal with, it was not a threat to her. 91 feet, 95 feet, 99 feet. An incomparably tall phantom soared into the skies with a terrifying aura. Standing upright, it had a burning gaze like a divine being. Immediately after, right in front of Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Yu, the 99 feet tall Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic rose by another foot. Boom, boom. Heaven and Earth rumbled. An incomparably thick pressure descended. This power surpassed common sense and limits. Even this world could not accommodate this Dharma characteristic. Thin tears appeared in the void around the Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic. 100 feet. 100 feet Dharma characteristic. In the cultivation world, 9 was an extreme number. Even the Green Lotus True Body only reached a height of 99 feet after fusing the 3 supreme Dharma characteristics and did not break through that barrier. However, the Prime Body cultivated 100 sutras with the martial Tao furnace and smelted all dharmic arts, forming an unprecedented 100 feet tall Dharma characteristic. If there was truly the saying of Peerless, that Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic could be considered as Peerless Dharma characteristic. None of the Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristics could ride above it. Even Monk Daming's 4 supreme dharmic bodies could not defend against the might of this Peerless Dharma characteristic. The existence of the martial Tao Prime Body was a variable. Nobody could divine his future. Rakshasa Yu's expression turned pale instantly. Although the difference between 99 feet and 100 feet was only a foot tall, the difference was like heaven and earth. The Peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao Prime Body lowered its head slightly and looked down at Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Yu. Its gaze shone like 2 blazing suns that could not be ignored. For the first time, Rakshasa Yu felt insignificant in the face of this Peerless Dharma characteristic. It felt as though he was being glared at by a true god, as though he could be suppressed to death at any moment. Rakshasa race? In my eyes, your ants as well. The martial Tao Prime Body said slowly with a voice like a gigantic bell and unparalleled might. So what if it's 100 feet? It's just a Dharma characteristic after all. Rakshasa Yu channeled his bloodline wildly and roared into the skies. 2 cold, shimmering curved sabers appeared between his hands as he flapped his wings, wanting to make use of his movement technique to maneuver around the Peerless Dharma characteristic that was 100 feet tall. You overestimate yourself. The martial Tao Prime Body sneered and his spirit consciousness moved. The Peerless Dharma characteristic behind him suddenly extended its palm and suppressed Rakshasa Yu. That gigantic palm covered the skies. A terrifying might and berserk power rained down. Even Rakshasa Yu's speed became extremely slow under the envelopment of that power. Rakshasa Yu's movement technique was completely useless against the suppression of the Peerless Dharma characteristic. He could only choose to fight against the Peerless Dharma characteristic head-on. Rakshasa Yu roared and channeled his bloodline dharmic powers. He raised the 2 sabers in his hands and slashed towards the palm of the Peerless Dharma characteristic. Clang! The 2 sabers of Rakshasa Yu struck the palm of the Peerless Dharma characteristic, and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. They could not slash their way in. Pissed! Rakshasa Yu's expression changed. The dharmic powers of 100 feet tall Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic were already condensed to this point and were indestructible. Even mighty figure dharmic weapons could not hurt it. A tremendous power surged into Rakshasa Yu's body through the curved saber. Poof, poof, poof. Rakshasa Yu's arms exploded into a blood mist. Immediately after, his upper body, chest, legs, and head exploded into a blood mist under the suppression of that terrifying power. Boom, boom. The palm of the Peerless Dharma characteristic crushed down and pushed Rakshasa Yu onto the ground, turning him into a meat sludge. His essence spirit did not even have a chance to escape and died on the spot. The martial Tao prime body attacked. All it took was a single punch to suppress a conjoint body mighty figure of the Rakshasa race completely. 1. Chapter 1485, Submit or Die. Chapter 1485, Submit or Die. Rakshasa Yu had died too quickly. Rakshasa Yu was stunned by the 100 feet Peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body. Before she could react, Rakshasa Yu was already dead. The martial Tao prime body had a cold expression as his gaze shifted to Rakshasa Yu. The Peerless Dharma characteristic behind him did the same thing. 2 divine lights shone down and Rakshasa Yu felt a tremendous pressure as though she no longer had any secrets. Submit or die. The martial Tao prime body said slowly. The Peerless Dharma characteristic spoke at the same time. The voice was deafening and reverberated through the world. Even when Rakshasa Yu and Rakshasa Yu descended, the martial Tao prime body had already activated the array formation around the place and isolated it. Otherwise, the mere aftershock of their exchange would have been enough to raze Pingyang town to the ground. Bow down? As though she had heard the greatest joke in the world, Rakshasa Yu laughed out of anger. So what if you're 100 feet tall Dharma characteristic? Is a Dharma characteristic Tao Lord worthy of me, making me submit? Rakshasa Yu's figure flashed as she wielded her curved saber and charged towards the martial Tao prime body. The men of the Rakshasa race had green faces and bared fangs. There were even wings on their backs that were terrifying. However, the women of the Rakshasa race were unusually beautiful. They did not have any meat wings or sharp nails, and merely looked taller than ordinary humans. Although she did not have meat wings, Rakshasa Yu's movement technique was even faster than Rakshasa Yu. The speed of the Rakshasa race was the fastest among the primordial 9 races. Even the Golden Crow race was slightly inferior. However, the Peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body distorted the void everywhere its gaze could reach. Any single step it took caused the ground to quake. Even a single breath of air from this Peerless Dharma characteristic would create a dermic power cyclone and condense a terrifying dermic art. Every single move was a dermic art. Instantly, the dermic powers in that part of the world surged. No matter how fast Rakshasa Yu was, she had to have enough space to dodge. However, this world was filled with endless dermic arts, and every single one of them was shockingly powerful. She could not dodge at all. Impossible. Rakshasa Yu had a bewildered expression, and her beautiful eyes shone with panic. A person's time and energy are limited. How can he cultivate so many dermic arts? 1. Boom. The Peerless Dharma characteristic punched over, and a gigantic air current surged. That punch seemed like it could break a hole in the firmaments. Rakshasa Yu had nowhere to run. Desolate Marshal, you've gone too far. Suddenly, Rakshasa Yu shrieked and channeled her bloodline. She conjured hand seals with both hands and struck the gigantic fist. At the same time, her eyes lit up as she swung the curved saber in her hands and hollered softly, "Apocalyptic Rakshasa slash." A saber shadow flashed and slashed towards the fist of the Peerless Dharma characteristic. The eyes of the martial Tao prime body focused. To everyone else, that was merely a slash from Rakshasa Yu. However, he could see that Rakshasa Yu had slashed hundreds of times in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of slashes were released at an extremely fast speed without any delays. All of them stacked together and formed a saber shadow. The burst of the secret skill increased the might of the slash by folds. That slash was indeed qualified to be called apocalyptic. Boom! Many dermic arts collided against the fist of the martial Tao prime body's Peerless Dharma characteristic like rocks sinking into the ocean without causing any ripples. Thereafter, the saber shadow descended and slashed the fist of the Peerless Dharma characteristic. Boom! There was a deafening bang. Peerless sharpness splattered everywhere, and the void trembled. The apocalyptic Rakshasa slash was shattered by a single punch from the Peerless Dharma characteristic. Cracks appeared on the fist of the Peerless Dharma characteristic. That slash had still injured the Peerless Dharma characteristic in the end. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and someone whose cultivation realm was a major cultivation realm above the martial Tao prime body, Rakshasa Yu was definitely not someone easy to deal with. Break. Unable to shatter the Peerless Dharma characteristic with a secret skill, Rakshasa Yu channeled her bloodline once more and the sound of tsunami echoed from her body. Thereafter, a phenomenon rose behind her. It was no wonder why Rakshasa Yu was this generation's monster incarnate of the Rakshasa race. She had already cultivated a bloodline phenomenon. 5 Rakshasa women appeared around Rakshasa Yu. They were beautiful and flawless, wearing veils with charming figures. However, they had cold expressions and glared at the martial Tao prime body without any emotions. Kill! Rakshasa Yu hollered. The 5 Rakshasa women beside her attacked at the same time and released their apocalyptic Rakshasa slash. 5 saber shadows descended. This time round, even the Peerless Dharma characteristic of the martial Tao prime body could not dodge and was struck heavily by the 5 apocalyptic Rakshasa slashes. Crack, crack, crack. The body of the Peerless Dharma characteristic gradually cracked. No matter how strong the Peerless Dharma characteristic was, there was a limit. Under the continuous attacks of Rakshasa Yu, the Peerless Dharma characteristic finally could not hold out. In the blink of an eye, it dissipated. Hee. Rakshasa Yu stood in the circle of 5 Rakshasas and sneered like a moon illuminated by a group of stars. Desolate Marshal, your 100 feet Dharma characteristic is shattered. Let's see what you have to make me submit. Bloodline phenomenon? The martial Tao prime body said indifferently, I have one too. Before his sentence was finished, the figure of the martial Tao prime body suddenly vanished. Rakshasa Yu's heart skipped a beat, and she tensed up instantly. She released her spirit consciousness and scanned her surroundings continuously, but she could not find any trace of the martial Tao prime body. Desolate Marshal, where are you? Rakshasa Yu was a little nervous and channeled her bloodline phenomenon. The 5 Rakshasa women protected her tightly. Suddenly, she felt the temperature of the entire world climb and purple flames burned furiously in the void. The bloodline phenomenon of the martial Tao prime body was a gigantic furnace. It was the martial Tao furnace that could nurture 100 sutras and smelt all dharmic arts as well as heaven and earth. The reason why Rakshasa Yu could not see the martial Tao prime body was because she was already in the gigantic furnace. This was a fight between bloodline phenomenons. Swoosh! A Rakshasa woman beside Rakshasa Yu blazed with flames and soared into the skies. In the blink of an eye, the Rakshasa woman condensed from the bloodline phenomenon was reduced to ashes. Rakshasa Yu's expression turned paler. She had already realized that she had fallen into the other party's bloodline phenomenon. Submit or die. The voice of the martial Tao prime body sounded with endless might and dominance. There was no third option for Rakshasa Yu. She either had to submit or die. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, how can I submit to you? Rakshasa Yu sneered. Desolate Marshal, dream on. Swoosh! As the purple flames surged, another Rakshasa woman turned into nothingness and vanished. Swoosh! 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 In just a few breaths, the Rakshasa women beside Rakshasa Yu were all refined by the martial Tao furnace. This meant that Rakshasa Yu's bloodline phenomenon was burned to ashes by the martial Tao furnace. Submit or die. The voice of the martial Tao prime body sounded once more. However, this time round, apart from endless might, there was a hint of determination, coldness, and killing intent in his voice. Chapter 1486, Protecting Ethereal. Chapter 1486, Protecting Ethereal. Rakshasa Yu had already realized that Desolate Marshal would truly refine her to ashes if she did not submit. Desolate Marshal did not care about women at all. For some reason, Rakshasa Yu suddenly felt aggrieved. Up till this point of her cultivation, her talent was terrifying and her beauty was unparalleled across the races. There were countless paragons and monster incarnates pursuing her. When had she ever suffered such grievances? She had never been bullied like this before. She was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and was unusually prideful. In her opinion, there was no one in this world who could make her submit. In fact, there was no one in the entire Rakshasa race that was worthy of her, let alone make her submit. However, the dominance of the martial Tao prime body caused Rakshasa Yu's conviction to collapse. Up till this point of her cultivation, she had never encountered someone so unreasonable and domineering. Instantly, she was flustered and had no idea what to do. Am I going to die in the hands of a Dharma-characteristic Tao Lord today? This desolate martial is truly detestable, extremely detestable. Isn't there a third choice? In that moment of life and death, Rakshasa Yu's thoughts were completely messed up. Nobody wanted to die. At this point of her cultivation, if nothing went wrong, there was a high chance she would advance to the Mahayana realm and become a patriarch. She did not want to die here at all. However, Rakshasa Yu was indignant. Was she really going to have to submit to Desolate Martial? Rakshasa Yu's conviction had already begun to waver, and she fell into immense pain with a conflicted expression. However, the purple flames in the martial Tao furnace did not have any intention of stopping and began to burn on her body. Desolate Martial, you're truly way too detestable. Rakshasa Yu shrieked. Desolate Martial was not even willing to give her any time to consider. Rakshasa Yu's eyes reddened and tears welled up in them. However, she was unyielding and refused to let them fall. Finally, she grit her teeth and said hatefully, I can submit, but I'll never betray the Rakshasa race or harm my clansmen. She was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, and the bloodline of the Rakshasa flowed within her. That was her bottom line. Suddenly, Rakshasa Yu felt her body lighten, and the sense of danger that her life was hanging on a thread had vanished. The purple flames that surrounded her initially had vanished as well. It was as though she had returned to that familiar world. The surroundings were no longer suffocating or scorching. The air was fresh. Not far away, the martial Tao prime body sat casually at a stone table and sipped tea leisurely with an indifferent expression. The tender and obedient child stood guard behind him quietly. Everything looked peaceful. Rakshasa Yu felt the joy of escaping a calamity. Even that extremely detestable person looked much more pleasing to the eye. However, she quickly realized her situation. Right now, she had already submitted to Desolate Martial. Theoretically speaking, the Dharma-characteristic Tao Lord before her was her master. However, she could not bring herself to call him master. With a cold expression, Rakshasa Yu said in a deep voice, Desolate Martial, I'll submit to you, but I won't call you master. As you wish. The martial Tao prime body said indifferently without being angered or forcing anything. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. This was not the reaction she had expected. After a moment of silence, she continued, also, I'll definitely not do something like serving tea or pouring water. As you wish. That was still the martial Tao prime body's reply. Rakshasa Yu was stunned for a moment. Why did Desolate Martial suddenly become so easygoing? Immediately, she seemed to have thought of something and could not help but change her expression slightly. Clenching her fists tightly, she grit her teeth. Desolate Martial, don't even think of touching me. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, I'll definitely not betray my body. You're thinking too much. Rakshasa Yu was interrupted by the martial Tao prime body before she could finish. This time round, Rakshasa Yu was truly a little dazed. There was no need for her to call him master, pour him tea, offer her body, or betray her clansmen. From the looks of it, there was nothing to lose by submitting to Desolate Martial. The moment that thought crossed her mind, Rakshasa Yu spat internally. The reason why she was in such a state was completely because of Desolate Martial. How could she have such thoughts? Rakshasa Yu shrugged her head and lamented internally. I must be confused because of the immense heat just now. Right then, the martial Tao prime body said slowly, I won't have any demands or restrictions on your freedom under normal circumstances. In fact, You can even challenge me at any time if you feel that you're strong enough. As long as you can defeat me, there's naturally no need for you to submit to me." When she heard that, Rakshasa Yu's eyes lit up as she asked, "Are you serious?" This was equivalent to giving her hope. As long as she could defeat Desolate Marshal, she could break free from this shackle. "You don't have to question my words," the Martial Dao Prime Body said indifferently. "What exactly do you want me to do then?" Rakshasa Yu asked in a deep voice. The Martial Dao Prime Body said, "Make a move now and head to Ethereal Peak to guard it in secret. Kill anyone who trespasses into Ethereal Peak." "That's all?" Rakshasa Yu could not believe it. The reason why Desolate Marshal wanted her to submit was because he wanted her to protect a sect. "That's all?" The Martial Dao Prime Body nodded. Rakshasa Yu looked at the Martial Dao Prime Body with a conflicted expression. She suddenly realized that she could not understand this person. A moment later, Rakshasa Yu suddenly asked, "I want to know why you gave me a choice instead of killing me outright." "There are two reasons," the Martial Dao Prime Body said. "First, you stopped that Rakshasa outside Pingyang town. Furthermore, you didn't kill any mortals. Second, the reason why I spared your life was because I wanted you to protect Ethereal Peak." "That's all?" Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. "That's all?" The Martial Dao Prime Body nodded. "Humph." Rakshasa Yu harumphed coldly and turned to leave. For some reason, she felt an inexplicable sense of loss and frustration. Before long, she suddenly turned around and looked at the Martial Dao Prime Body, sneering, "Desolate Marshal, I haven't even made a Dao oath. Aren't you afraid that I'll escape secretly? If you escape, I'll naturally capture you back." The tone of the Martial Dao Prime Body was calm, but his words were unusually domineering. "He's still as detestable as ever." Rakshasa Yu sneered internally and turned to leave. A gust of wind blew past and her figure vanished. Chapter 1487, Gathering of Half-Martial Ancestors. Chapter 1487, Gathering of Half-Martial Ancestors. "Young master, we're letting her off just like that?" Tao Yao turned his head slightly and asked in confusion. "Of course, what else is there?" The Martial Dao Prime Body smiled. "Will Rakshasa Yu expose the secret of your Prime Body?" Tao Yao was worried. "No." The Martial Dao Prime Body shook his head. "That woman is prideful. Since I gave her hope, she'll definitely obsess over it and hope to defeat me one day. Furthermore," the Martial Dao Prime Body smiled gently, "I left a martial spirit imprint on her essence spirit. If she's truly dishonest and has second thoughts, there's no need to keep her alive." The moment the Martial Dao Furnace refined Rakshasa Yu's bloodline phenomenon, the Martial Dao Prime Body had already left that imprint. At that time, Rakshasa Yu's life was hanging by a thread and she was flustered, so she did not realize it at all. If the Martial Dao Prime Body discovered anything unusual about Rakshasa Yu, her essence spirit would be burned to ashes by the martial spirit fire with a single thought. The methods of the Martial Dao Prime Body were almost godly. "Young master, why did you ask her to protect Ethereal Peak?" Tao Yao thought for a moment and asked again, "Is Ethereal Peak in any danger?" "I don't know." The Martial Dao Prime Body shook his head. "However, the Green Lotus True Body is cultivating in the Kunlun ruins and has not appeared for a long time. The Rakshasa race can't wait any longer and already has designs on Pingyang town. It won't be surprising for anyone to target Ethereal Peak. It's just a safety precaution. It'll be best if no one has any designs on Ethereal Peak. If anyone truly doesn't know what's good for them, Rakshasa Yu will be able to handle them given her strength." Rakshasa Yu was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race and was at the conjoint body realm. However, even human half-martial ancestors might not be able to gain any advantage against her. Only the strongest half-martial ancestors of the human race could fight against her. Right now, Ethereal Peak could not even be considered as an upper sect. Even if anyone targeted Ethereal Peak, the strongest would only be conjoint body mighty figures or half-martial ancestor experts. Mahayana patriarchs were all in the advanced ancient battlefield, Who would waste time to come to the North region to do such a thing? Young master, I can't help to protect Ethereal Peak as well. Tao Yao raised his head slightly and clenched his fists. For some reason, after the martial Tao prime body subdued Rakshasa Yu, Tao Yao felt that his status seemed to have been challenged. The martial Tao prime body smiled. You still have to protect me? Ah. Tao Yao was stunned. The martial Tao prime body still required protection. I'm about to break through. The martial Tao prime body said indifferently and stood up to head to his room. Tao Yao, I'll leave Pingyang Town to you. 1. Don't worry, young master. Tao Yao agreed hurriedly. North Region, Glass Palace. A middle-aged cultivator stood in front of a cave abode on an immortal mountain. He was tall and wore a glass Daoist robe that shone with a rainbow luster under the sunlight. It was extremely beautiful. The person stood in midair and shone with a divine light. He was like a god with a terrifying aura. Chun Yu. He was a half-martial ancestor of Glass Palace. Chun Yu's life was also a legend. When he was young, he experienced wars and lost his family, turning into an orphan child. Relying on the fact that he had a strong and tall figure from a tender age, coupled with his ruthless nature despite his youth, he gathered a group of people before long and lived off robbing others. Later on, a Tao Lord of Glass Palace appreciated his potential, and he stepped onto the path of cultivation, soaring through the skies thereafter. Be it the Golden Core Phenomenon ranking or Heaven and Earth Dharma characteristic ranking, Chun Yu was one of the top 3 existences back then and was lauded as one of the strongest paragons of that generation. Before long, suddenly, an auspicious cloud floated over from the distant skies. For figures rode on the cloud, and their auras were not inferior to Chen Yu. Another 4 half-martial ancestor experts. Ha 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 ha. Chen Yu burst into laughter and rode the wind, taking the initiative to welcome them. Fellow Taoists, how have you been? The 4 half-martial ancestors came from different sections. The one in the middle was Chaos Essence Sect's half-martial ancestor D-Fan. Another person was skinny and had an indifferent expression. Standing there, he was like an unsheathed sword with a sharp killing intent. This was half-martial ancestor D-Ju of Sword Sect. The cultivator on the left had a square face and looked dignified as his body shone with faint lightning. He was half-martial ancestor Kong Shao of Zephyr Thunder Palace. The cultivator on the right wore a dark golden dermic robe with mysterious stars tattooed on it. This was from Heavenly Dipper Sect, half-martial ancestor Illumination. The 5 half-martial ancestor experts were considered notorious. In the cultivation world, every single one of them would attract countless gazes wherever they went. Furthermore, there were 5 half-martial ancestors gathered. Among the 5 half-martial ancestors, some of them were even paragons and monster incarnates of the same generation who had fought before. We've all been cultivating and comprehending the Tao of divine powers. Indeed, it's been a long time. D-Fan said in a deep voice, if Desolate Marshall hadn't appeared out of nowhere in this generation, the few of us probably wouldn't have been alarmed. However, we realized it too late. Half-martial ancestor Illumination of Heavenly Dipper Sect shook his head. I heard that in the battle at Enigma Palace, this lad's combat strength was torrential and even the Palace Lord of Enigma Palace was suppressed by him. This lad has already matured. Even if we join forces, we might not stand a chance of winning. Half-martial ancestor Kong Shao of Zephyr Thunder Palace sighed gently. Humph. Suddenly, Sword Sect's half-martial ancestor D-Ju sneered. If you guys are afraid, I alone am enough. Let's see if Desolate Marshall's heaven-slaying sword art is stronger or my earth-slaying sword art. Both half-martial ancestor Illumination and half-martial ancestor Kong Shao frowned. They were all half-martial ancestor experts and had similar reputations to half-martial ancestor D-Ju. Naturally, they could not hold it in any longer after being mocked by D-Ju. All right, this rare gathering is to deal with Desolate Marshall. Don't fight among ourselves first and let others laugh at us. Chun Yu tried to smooth things over. Half-martial ancestor D-Ju still had a disdainful expression. The earth-slaying sword art had always been in Sword Sect. However, that sword art was difficult to comprehend and cultivate. Throughout history, there were very few people who could cultivate that sword art. In order to increase the combat strength of sword sect cultivators, the Sword Emperor used the earth-slaying sword art as a foundation and deduced the lifeless sword art. The cultivation of the lifeless sword art was relatively simple compared to it. Of course, its power was far inferior to the earth-slaying sword art as well. Half-martial ancestor Deju indeed had the right to be proud. If a life-and-death battle were to break out, he would be the one most likely to survive among the 5 of them. Half-martial ancestor Deju did not have any deep feud with Su Zimo. He only had a single goal for coming out of seclusion, the heaven-slaying sword art in Su Zimo's possession. If he could obtain the heaven-slaying sword art, he would definitely be able to advance to the Mahayana realm smoothly, and his future potential would be unimaginable. Everyone, the main reason why we're heading to Ethereal Peak is to force Desolate Marshal to appear. Defan said in a deep voice. From the information I gathered, Desolate Marshal is an extremely loyal person. If he knew about this, he would definitely barge in foolishly even if he knew that it was a trap. That's a good plan. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination nodded. Once Desolate Marshal appears, even if we can't defeat him with our joint forces, experts of the Primordial 6 races will definitely be able to lock him down. 1. At that time, Desolate Marshal will definitely die. Chapter 1488, Too Noisy. Chapter 1488, Too Noisy. More than 100 years ago, Su Zimo came out of seclusion and entered the Dharma characteristic realm. All the upper sect masters of the North region came to pay their respects. Thereafter, Su Zimo destroyed Dragon Tiger sect and left all their cultivation techniques and secret skills in Ethereal Peak. In Dragon Tiger sect, Su Zimo obtained many high-level elixirs, Dao Lord dermic weapons, and a large number of spirit stones from the sect masters of the upper sects. Later on, when Monk Yuan Bei passed away, Su Zimo shifted all the ancient books at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley to Ethereal Peak. With such a massive amount of cultivation resources and rich cultivation techniques and secret skills, the many cultivators of Ethereal Peak experienced a massive boost to their cultivation realms and their overall strength. What Ethereal Peak obtained was not only the foundation and resources of Dragon Tiger sect, but also the resources of Daming Monastery and Fahua Monastery. After more than 100 years, the old immortal crane broke through once more and entered the conjoint body realm. As for Ethereal Peak's sect master, Ling Yun, he was already a Dharma characteristic Dao Lord. The 5 peak masters of the past, Xian Yi, Lu Hui, and the others, were even at the Void Reversion realm. Over the years, due to the sect's rise in cultivation techniques and secret skills of super sects such as Daming and Fahua monasteries, there were even some Dharma characteristic Dao Lords and conjoint body mighty figures who were attracted to join the sect. Including Yin Shi, Ethereal Peak's current strength and foundation was similar to the 108 upper sects. This day, 5 people arrived above Ethereal Peak. The 5 of them descended and stood in 5 different directions, surrounding the massive Ethereal Peak in the middle. "Who's there?" The cultivator guarding the entrance shouted. "Humph." Among the 5 of them, a cold and sharp cultivator was motionless. However, a bright glint flashed through his eyes. The cultivator guarding the mountain gate was sliced into 2 instantly, and his blood splattered on the spot, dying. As a half-martial ancestor, a single gaze was enough for Deju to kill a Foundation Establishment cultivator. Clang, clang, clang. A warning bell sounded from Ethereal Peak. Many cultivators appeared and looked towards the skies. The old immortal crane, Ling Yun, Xianyi, and the others came forth one after another as well. This aura. The old immortal crane's expression changed starkly as she looked at the 5 figures in midair. Half-martial ancestors. A conjoint body mighty figure at the side exclaimed with a pale expression. The shout caused a commotion in Ethereal Peak. In the hearts of most Ethereal Peak cultivators, half-martial ancestor experts were legendary existences and were worlds apart from them. To think that they would see them today. Furthermore, 5 of them had appeared all of a sudden. The most terrifying thing was that the 5 half-martial ancestors were clearly hostile and murderous. Against the might of the 5 half-martial ancestors, the 5 peaks of Ethereal Peak could not hold on any longer and cracks appeared on the mountains. Although the old immortal crane did not recognize the 5 half-martial ancestors, she understood when she saw their sect emblems. Sword Sect, Chaos Essence Sect, and Zephyr Thunder Palace. All of those super sects had extremely deep grudges with Suzimo. The 5 half-martial ancestor experts must have come for Desolate Martial. Against the might of half-martial ancestors, a mighty figure of Ethereal Peak had a horrified expression and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, 5 half-martial ancestors. Desolate Martial is not in Ethereal Peak. That's not important." D-Fan interrupted the conjoint body mighty figure with a cold expression and said indifferently, "Desolate Martial came from Ethereal Peak. That's all that matters. Now that we're here, the tens of thousands of cultivators from Ethereal Peak can dream about leaving alive." A single sentence from a half-martial ancestor was equivalent to declaring the death penalty for everyone from Ethereal Peak. The old immortal crane felt bitter. Even though she had cultivated to the conjoint body realm, she could not defeat the might of a half-martial ancestor. Against absolute strength, she still had no way of resisting. Please spare me, Senior." A few mighty figures of Ethereal Peak knelt down and begged with horrified expressions. "It's not my fault," D-Fan said coldly. "The fault is that you guys shouldn't have joined Ethereal Peak or gotten involved with Desolate Martial. We joined Ethereal Peak later on and have never seen Desolate Martial before. We have nothing to do with Desolate Martial or Ethereal Peak." The mighty figures defended desperately. "Cut the crap with them." Diju sneered and waved his sleeves. Instantly, a few sword chi burst forth at an extremely fast speed and entered the glabellas of the mighty figures right in front of their eyes. These mighty figures of Ethereal Peak let go of their dignity and everything else as they begged for mercy. However, they did not expect that they would be the first to die. Not to mention that Diju was a half-martial ancestor expert. Even if Diju was at the conjoint body realm, the few mighty figures could not defend against the slash. The old immortal crane shook her head gently. When Ethereal Peak was on the brink of danger, these few mighty figures did not hesitate and tried their best to sever their relationship with Ethereal Peak. There was no pity in the old immortal crane's heart for their deaths. "Activate!" the old immortal crane shouted. Xian Yi and the others were long prepared as dermic powers burst forth from their fingertips, entering every single corner of Ethereal Peak. Buzz! The formation patterns lit up. Ethereal Peak's Sect Protection Formation had already been activated. "How dare you take out such an array formation in front of us? How ignorant!" Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao sneered and extended his palm, pointing at the firmaments. Instantly, dark clouds filled the skies of Ethereal Peak. Snap! A gigantic thunderbolt descended and struck Ethereal Peak's Sect Protection Formation. Crack! 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 Cracks appeared on the Sect Protection Formation, and it shattered under the despaired gazes of many Ethereal Peak cultivators. The Sect Protection Formation could not even defend against a casual attack from half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao. The old immortal crane sighed. The difference was too great. Even she was merely an ant in the eyes of the 5 half-martial ancestors, let alone the other cultivators of Ethereal Peak. She could be crushed with ease. "Don't worry." D-Fan smiled gently. "We won't kill all of you in a day. We'll kill you slowly. Only half will be killed today. We'll kill another half tomorrow. I'll spread the news. As long as Desolate Martial is still in Tianhuang mainland, he'll definitely know." Everyone from Ethereal Peak had dejected expressions. The 5 half-martial ancestors exchanged glances and chuckled. "The 5 of you are too noisy. Can you scram further?" Suddenly, a voice sounded from Ethereal Peak. It was a woman's voice that was extremely pleasant to listen to. However, there was a deep hint of impatience and disgust in her tone. Everyone from Ethereal Peak was stunned and looked over instinctively. Someone among them dared to speak rudely to a half-martial ancestor. Fan and the others shifted their gazes and locked onto a woman at the same time. The woman walked out from the crowd slowly. She was at the conjoint body realm and was a head taller than the people around her. Her skin was fair as snow, and she was extremely beautiful with a hint of foreign charm in her eyes. Fan and the others frowned slightly. Although this woman looked no different from a human, they had lived for more than 10,000 years and could sense that something was amiss. The old immortal crane was stunned as well. That was because she had never seen this woman before. More than that, she did not know when this woman arrived here. Chapter 1489, Wrath of Rakshasa Yu. Chapter 1489, Wrath of Rakshasa Yu. Given Rakshasa Yu's capabilities, it was way too easy for her to hide from the old immortal crane and everyone from Ethereal Peak. The martial Tao Prime body wanted her to guard in secret. Therefore, she did not expose her tracks. To think that the detestable person had guessed correctly, there were indeed people here to cause trouble for Ethereal Peak. Rakshasa Yu suffered a huge loss in the hands of the martial Tao Prime body and was even taken advantage of. She had long been fuming internally. Even though she was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, she was stuck in Ethereal Peak during this period of time, unable to show her face or speak to anyone. As such, she could not vent her frustrations. Furthermore, the more she thought about it, the more aggrieved she felt. Today, Fan and the others had come knocking on their own. She had finally found someone to vent her frustrations on. "You're not human." Half-martial ancestor Illumination narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "So what if I'm not?" Rakshasa Yu sneered, "I'm pretty pissed off right now. Since the 5 of you came knocking on your own, I have no choice but to kill all of you." Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao swept his gaze across Rakshasa Yu brazenly and smiled. "Fairy, there's no need to get angry. If you agree to submit to me today, I can make the decision to protect you." 1. The word submit triggered Rakshasa Yu instantly. Right now, the most unendurable word for her to listen to was submit. Suddenly, Rakshasa Yu shrieked as though she had gone mad. "You shameless old dog. You truly have a death wish." Swoosh. Suddenly, her figure vanished from the spot. The old immortal crane was not far away. However, she merely blinked her eye and Rakshasa Yu had already vanished. Furthermore, she could not detect Rakshasa Yu at all. It was too fast. The old immortal crane was shocked. Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao's heart skipped a beat as well. Although he had lustful thoughts of subduing Rakshasa Yu, he was a half-martial ancestor expert who had been famous for a long time after all and had always been wary. The moment Rakshasa Yu vanished, he tore a talisman and retreated. At the same time, a cold beam slashed heavily above half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao's head. Snap! The protection talisman that half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao had just conjured shattered instantly. This time round, half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao broke out in cold sweat. If he had reacted slightly slower and had not conjured his protection talisman, that cold light would have taken his life. It's the Rakshasa race. The moment Rakshasa Yu attacked, the 5 half-martial ancestors recognized her identity and background at the same time. "Fellow Taoists, help." Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao shouted hurriedly. This female Rakshasa is troublesome to deal with. Without his reminder, the 4 half-martial ancestors, Fan, Ju, Qin Yu and Illumination, had already attacked one after another and charged towards Rakshasa Yu. Good. When Rakshasa Yu saw the 5 half-martial ancestors approaching, she was even more enraged and said coldly, "The 5 of you truly don't know what's good for you. How dare you surround me? Kill." She channeled her bloodline and wielded curved sabers. With her terrifying movement speed, she shuttled through the 5 half-martial ancestors. Great Chaos Essence Palm, Earth-Slaying Sword Chi, Heavenly Thunder Manual, Rainbow Glass Body, Radiant Sunlight. The 5 half-martial ancestors released terrifying dermic arts that tore through the air. Each dermic art contained a trace of divine power. Instantly, the weather changed. Rakshasa Yu's figure was completely restricted. Under normal circumstances, given Rakshasa Yu's combat strength, she could definitely kill a human half-martial ancestor. However, the 5 people before her were the strongest paragons of the human half-martial ancestors. Even Rakshasa Yu felt immense pressure when the 5 of them joined forces. However, the pressure intensified the rage in her heart. As the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, she carried the reputation and dignity of the entire Rakshasa race. She had already lost once and did not want to lose a second time. Boom! Rakshasa Yu channeled her bloodline wildly, and the deafening sound of a tsunami could be heard from her body. However, that was not the end of it. Rakshasa Yu's aura was still rising rapidly. Right in front of countless gazes, the figures of 5 Rakshasa women appeared behind Rakshasa Yu, exuding a powerful might. Bloodline phenomenon. The 5 half-martial ancestors frowned slightly. Those who could cultivate a bloodline phenomenon were all monster incarnates. Kill. Rakshasa Yu pointed forward, and the 5 Rakshasa women attacked one after another. Wielding 2 sabers, they charged towards the 5 half-martial ancestors. As for Rakshasa Yu, she had already targeted half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao and attacked wildly. The power of the bloodline phenomenon intensified the pressure on the 5 half-martial ancestors. Defan's expression changed indeterminately as he suddenly shouted, as a Rakshasa, "You clearly have a deep feud with Desolate Martial. Yet, you're protecting Ethereal Peak that's related to Desolate Martial. If the Rakshasa clan leader and young master knew about this, you would definitely be severely punished." Humph! Rakshasa Yu sneered. "I'm the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. I'm Rakshasa Yu." The expressions of the 5 half-martial ancestors changed. If it was just an ordinary Rakshasa, it would have been fine if the 5 of them killed her. However, the person before him was the young mistress of the Rakshasa race. That identity was way too sensitive. The 5 half-martial ancestors did not say anything, but there was a hint of fear in their eyes. When Desolate Martial killed the young master of the Bloodvine race, they set the killing badge on him. Even until now, he was hiding somewhere and did not dare to reveal himself. If they killed Rakshasa Yu, they would be met with a calamity as well. With that thought, the 5 half-martial ancestors became cautious. Both parties were in a stalemate to begin with, and it was hard to tell who was stronger. Right now, one party was cautious and fearful. However, the other party released the most terrifying attacks as though she had gone mad. In the blink of an eye, the situation half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao was facing changed drastically. Defan, Diju, Chenyu and Illumination exchanged glances and made a decision at the same time with a tacit understanding: retreat. With Rakshasa Yu here today, no matter how they fought today, nothing would come out of it. If they were careless, they might even be killed by Rakshasa Yu here. If it was a one-on-one fight, none of them were a match for Rakshasa Yu. Swash, swash, swash. Defan and the others released another Dermic art. After bluffing, they released their escape techniques and fled in 4 different directions. Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao had long realized the plans of Defan and the others as well and did not dare to linger. Streaks of lightning appeared on his body. Wild winds howled and half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao released Zephyr Thunder Escape without turning to flee. "Old dog, you're still thinking of escaping?" Rakshasa Yu did not have clone techniques and could not be bothered with the others. Her target was half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao alone. No matter how fast Zephyr Thunder Escape was, he could not match the Rakshasa race. In a dozen breaths, Rakshasa Yu had already caught up and slashed forward with her curved sabers. Apocalyptic Rakshasa Slash. 2 saber beams descended with a terrifying aura. Sensing danger, half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao knew that he could not escape. He could only pause and throw out a gigantic shield in front of him. Clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. Half-martial ancestor Kong Xiao shuddered. The 2 saber beams penetrated the half-martial ancestor dermic weapon and entered his body, releasing a destructive power that could destroy all life. Eternal Sacred King. Chapter 1490, Turning to Pingyang Town. Chapter 1490. Turning to Pingyang Town. Boom! The body of half-martial ancestor Kong Shao exploded instantly and flesh splattered everywhere. The blood of the half-martial ancestor dyed half the skies red. Swoosh! As the blood mist surged, an essence spirit fled into the distance with a panicked expression. Humph! In a flash, Rakshasa Yu scooped and captured half-martial ancestor Kong Zhao's essence spirit in her palm. She said coldly, "Old dog, didn't you want me to submit? Are you even worthy?" She did not give half-martial ancestor Kong Shao any chance to beg for mercy and stuffed his essence spirit into her mouth, swallowing it. Right in front of everyone from Ethereal Peak, a half-martial ancestor was killed by Rakshasa Yu. The eyes of the Ethereal Peak cultivators nearly popped out. Such a beautiful woman was so powerful and violent that she devoured the essence spirit of a half-martial ancestor. The remaining 4 half-martial ancestors were also beaten away by this powerful woman. Rakshasa Yu's spirit consciousness moved and extended hundreds of thousands of kilometers instantly. However, Fan and the other 3 half-martial ancestors had already escaped from the range of her spirit consciousness and vanished. Rakshasa Yu frowned slightly. If she were to chase after them now, it would be difficult for her to catch up to Fan and the other 3. Furthermore, if she were to leave Ethereal Peak would be met with a great calamity if any other strong foes were to arrive. After pondering for a moment, Rakshasa Yu decided to guard Ethereal Peak and did not leave. Although the battle was short, Rakshasa Yu finally managed to quell the frustrations in her heart after killing a half-martial ancestor. "I heard that everyone from the Rakshasa race are all extremely ugly. Why is Rakshasa Yu so beautiful? She's even prettier than senior sister Shui Yun. I wonder. I even heard that the Rakshasa race is extremely violent and bloodthirsty. Why would they help us? Could there be good people in the Rakshasa race as well?" Many cultivators of Ethereal Peak discussed softly. The old immortal crane had already walked forward and bowed to Rakshasa Yu. "Thank you for your assistance, young mistress of the Rakshasa race. Ethereal Peak is extremely grateful." The old immortal crane had a terrible impression of the Rakshasa race. However, Rakshasa Yu had helped Ethereal Peak tide through this calamity after all. No matter what, she had to express her thanks personally. "It's nothing much." Rakshasa Yu waved it off. If it was any other time, she would not have bothered to speak to an ant like the old immortal crane. However, she had just killed a half-martial ancestor and felt much better after venting the anger in her chest. "Pardon me for being bold, senior. May I know why you're in Ethereal Peak and why you're helping us?" The old immortal crane could not help but ask, puzzled. At the mention of that, a refined face appeared in Rakshasa Yu's mind, and she grit her teeth in anger. "It's because of an extremely detestable person," Rakshasa Yu said hatefully. "Ah." The old immortal crane was slightly stunned. Rakshasa Yu shifted her gaze to the old immortal crane and suddenly asked, "I heard that Desolate Marshal came from Ethereal Peak. In that case, do you know Desolate Marshal's past very well?" The old immortal crane could not understand how Rakshasa Yu's thoughts could leap onto Desolate Marshal right away and merely nodded her head. "I know a little." "All right, come over and explain everything to me carefully," Rakshasa Yu said and turned towards a cave abode. The old immortal crane was puzzled, but still followed. Under normal circumstances, the Rakshasa race and Desolate Marshal were irreconcilable. Rakshasa Yu should hate Desolate Marshal to the core. However, for some reason, the old immortal crane could not sense it. On the contrary, Rakshasa Yu seemed to be curious about Desolate Marshal. 50,000 kilometers away from Ethereal Peak, in midair, Fan, Ju, Chenyu, and Illumination gathered together once more with ugly expressions and a hint of embarrassment. Half-Martial Ancestor Illumination said, "Seems like Kong Shao is dead. Damn it." Half-Martial Ancestor Chen Yu could not help but curse. "Why is there a crazy woman in Ethereal Peak? What I don't understand is why the young mistress of the Rakshasa race would interfere and protect everyone from Ethereal Peak." Fan frowned. Could the Rakshasa race have some deeper plan? Did Rakshasa Yu attack us because our appearance disrupted their plans? Humph. Half-martial ancestor Deceive harumphed coldly. If not for the fact that she's the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, I would have killed her a long time ago. How unlucky. Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu spat as well. As a half-martial ancestor of Glass Palace, he had a strong physique and bloodline and was best at melee combat. Rakshasa Yu's movement technique was extremely fast, and he could not gain any advantage against her. Instead, she slashed a few wounds on his body. The four of them were furious. The trip to Ethereal Peak was completely different from what they had expected. Not only did they fail to destroy Ethereal Peak, half-martial ancestor Kong Shao was killed by Rakshasa Yu, who appeared out of nowhere. The four of them were even disgraced and returned in defeat. Let's head back. We won't stand a chance with that crazy woman in Ethereal Peak. A moment later, half-martial ancestor Illumination said, "That's the only way." Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu nodded as well. Deju's expression was cold, and he said nothing. It was clear that he was indignant. Suddenly, half-martial ancestor Defan asked, "Everyone, are you willing to return empty-handed after traveling thousands of kilometers? So what if we're indignant?" Half-martial ancestor Illumination shook his head. Ethereal Peak is protected by the young mistress of the Rakshasa race, and Desolate Marshal has disappeared for 20 years. There's nothing we can do even if we stay in the North region. There's another place. Defan smirked as he said slowly with a cold glint in his eyes, "Pingyang Town." Pingyang Town? The other three half-martial ancestors frowned. Defan explained, "Over the years, I've gathered a lot of information about Desolate Marshal. Pingyang Town is Desolate Marshal's hometown. Is there anything strange about Pingyang Town?" Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu asked. Defan shook his head. "Not really. However, the mortals inside have a longer lifespan." Half-martial ancestor Illumination frowned. Ever since Desolate Marshal started cultivating, he has already severed ties with the mortal world. They're mere mortals. What do they have to do with Desolate Marshal? "No," Defan said in a deep voice. "There must be something fishy about how Pingyang Town is able to remain peaceful and safe in this chaotic era. Furthermore, Desolate Marshal is loyal and sentimental. I heard that the corpses of his kin and his childhood sweetheart are buried in Pingyang Town." Two half-martial ancestors, Chen Yu and Illumination, shrugged their shoulders in disapproval. In their opinion, everything was long in the past and had nothing to do with Desolate Marshal anymore. This time round, we five half-martial ancestors came out. If we return just like that, we'll truly be worthless. However, half-martial ancestor Deju suddenly said, "Let's go to Pingyang Town. Kill everyone there and spare no one. Also, find Desolate Marshal's ancestral tomb. I'm going to dig out the corpses of his kin and burn them into ashes." Everyone knew that half-martial ancestor Deju had a pent-up frustration in his heart after the setback of Ethereal Peak and wanted to vent it out. The mortals of Pingyang Town could only consider themselves unlucky. Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu and half-martial ancestor Illumination had no objections either. After all, in their eyes, it was nothing much to kill some mere mortals. Chapter 1491. You guys came at the right time. Chapter 1491. You guys came at the right time. Pingyang Town. In a quiet residence, the door creaked open and a handsome man in purple robes walked out with a calm expression. "Young master, you're out of seclusion." Tao Yao welcomed him. In his eyes, the martial Dao prime body seemed to have changed, and there was an indescribable aura around him. "Young master, you've already entered the conjoint body realm?" Tao Yao asked again with a delighted expression. "Yes." The martial Dao prime body nodded. Entering the conjoint body realm was much more difficult and dangerous than he had imagined. There had never been anyone who could condense a heaven and earth dharma characteristic that was 100 feet tall throughout history. The path of the martial Dao prime body could only be explored by him. After fusing with the Peerless Dharma characteristic, the body of the martial Tao prime body nearly collapsed countless times and turned into nothingness. Thankfully, he managed to survive in the end and entered the conjoint body realm to become a mighty figure. Right then, the martial Tao prime body sensed something, and his expression changed as he turned to look into the distance. "What's wrong, young master?" Tao Yao asked curiously when he saw the odd expression on the martial Tao prime body's face. "Someone's here." The martial Tao prime body shook his head gently with a mocking gaze. To think that a mere Pingyang town filled with mortals would be able to attract half-martial ancestors. Half-martial ancestor experts are here? Tao Yao's heart skipped a beat. The martial Tao prime body had already said it, but he still could not sense any traces of any half-martial ancestor expert. Although they were both at the conjoint body realm, the senses of the martial Tao prime body had far surpassed Tao Yao. "Young master, I'll go bash them up." Tao Yao raised his fist. "There's no need." The martial Tao prime body smiled faintly. "Coincidentally, there are some grudges that can be resolved today." Right then, Tao Yao exclaimed softly, "I can sense them. What a powerful aura. The four of them are not easy to deal with." Tao Yao could sense that the four half-martial ancestors were extremely fast. In less than 10 breaths, they had already arrived in the skies of Pingyang Town. "Mortals of Pingyang Town, listen up." Half-martial ancestor Diju had a cold expression as he looked down and said indifferently, "All of you are very unlucky. All of you have to die today. Your luck isn't good either." 1. Right then, a calm voice sounded from a residence. "MMM?" There was someone in Pingyang Town who dared to challenge a half-martial ancestor. The gazes of Fan and the other three shifted towards the voice. When they saw the person in the courtyard, Fan and the other three were stunned on the spot with disbelief in their eyes. "That person, Desolate Marshal?" Fan was the first to react and shouted. The other three had only seen a drawing of Su Zimo. However, Fan could recognize Su Zimo right away because he saw the latter in real life after trying to kill the latter twice, personally. "So, you're hiding here." Chun Yu's gaze intensified. Initially, the four of them merely wanted to take a walk around Pingyang Town and kill the mortals there to vent their anger. To think that he would bump into Su Zimo in Pingyang Town. Swish. In a flash, half-martial ancestor Diju arrived above the residence of the martial Tao prime body right away. His gaze was sharp, even sharper than sword lights. "Everyone, the target is right here. Let's not let him escape." Half-martial ancestor Diju said slowly. "Something doesn't seem right." Fan frowned and scanned the martial Tao prime body. This person was identical to Desolate Marshal. However, for some reason, Fan felt an unusual aura from the martial Tao prime body. Even he felt his heart skip a beat from that aura. However, he, half-martial ancestor Illumination and half-martial ancestor Chun, Yu still descended above the residence and formed an encirclement with half-martial ancestor Diju. "Desolate Marshal?" Half-martial ancestor Chun Yu grinned. "I heard that you wreaked havoc in Enigma Palace with torrential combat strength and even suppressed the Palace Lord of Enigma Palace. Let's see what you can do today." Half-martial ancestor Illumination said, "Desolate Marshal, your cultivation hasn't improved at all in the past 20 years. To think that you're still at the early stage conjoint body realm." Half-martial ancestor Illumination relaxed slightly. Thankfully, Desolate Marshal's cultivation did not advance. "Desolate Marshal, hand over the heaven-slaying sword art, and I can leave you with a full corpse." Half-martial ancestor Diju said coldly. "Oh." The gaze of the martial Tao prime body shifted and swept across half-martial ancestor Diju. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he murmured, "What a powerful sword chi and rich killing intent." The sword chi and killing intent were similar to the heaven-slaying sword chi, but there was an obvious difference. "Seems like you've cultivated the earth-slaying sword art." The martial Tao prime body smiled gently and nodded. "You came at the right time. You saved me the trouble of looking for you. You're after my earth-slaying sword art." Half-martial ancestor Diju could tell what the martial Tao prime body meant, and his expression turned even colder. The martial Dao Prime body no longer looked at half-martial ancestor Diju. He turned to D-Fan and said slowly, "Old dog D-Fan, as a half-martial ancestor, you tried to kill me twice. You came at the right time today as well." Before his sentence was finished, the martial Dao Prime body stood up and stomped on the ground gently. Swoosh! Instantly, barriers rose within the residence, isolating the place from Pingyang Town. D-Fan and the other three were shocked and summoned their destiny dermic weapons right away. Half-martial ancestor Chun Yu took out a pair of gigantic astral hammers from his storage bag. The pair of astral hammers were made completely from stars that fell from the skies. Each of them was extremely heavy and could crush a mountain with ease. I've long heard that Desolate Martial is invincible in melee combat. I'll test out whether you're truly capable or nothing but an empty shell. Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu hollered and channeled his blood chi, reaching the tsunami blood realm instantly. Ta, ta, ta. He charged towards the martial Dao Prime body with huge strides. With every step he took, the entire world would tremble. In just 3 strides, half-martial ancestor Chun Yu had already arrived before the martial Dao Prime body. After those 3 strides, half-martial ancestor Chun Yu's aura had already reached its limits. "Take my hammers." Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu's voice was like a bell as he swung the astral hammers in his hands and smashed it towards the head of the martial Dao Prime body. The astral hammers were many times larger than the body of the martial Dao Prime body. A large shadow enveloped down as though the sky was collapsing. "Attack!" At the same time, D-Fan shouted softly. Dermic powers surged within his body and he extended his palm through the void. It was as though a gigantic millstone was formed in midair and crushed towards the martial Dao Prime body. Great Chaos Essence Palm. Radiant Sunlight. Half-martial ancestor illumination conjured hand seals with both hands, and a blinding light seemed to be formed from a blazing sun. There were countless beams of light. Every single beam of light possessed a terrifying energy that could penetrate a conjoint body mighty figure's body. When the Earth's killing intent is released, the dragon snake shall rise. Half-martial ancestor Diju chanted softly and closed his sword finger, slashing gently at the martial Dao Prime body. Swoosh! Endless sword chi gathered instantly, forming a gigantic sword. It was ferocious and seemed like it wanted to pierce a hole in the firmaments as it descended with a terrifying might. The sword descended like a divine dragon and looked down at the world, as though it wanted to slice everything before it into nothingness. Chapter 1492, Desolate Marshal's Prime Body. Chapter 1492, Desolate Marshal's Prime Body. The attacks of the 4 half-martial ancestors were terrifying. However, the expression of the martial Dao Prime body did not change at all and was frighteningly calm. If the 4 half-martial ancestors had joined forces when he was at the Dharma characteristic realm, they would indeed have caused him some trouble. However, now that he was at the conjoint body realm, the attacks of D-Fan and the other 3 were nothing in his eyes. Boom, boom, boom. The martial Dao Prime body channeled his bloodline as well and reached the tsunami blood realm right away. Although it was the same tsunami blood, the blood chi of the martial Dao Prime body surged. It was majestic and emitted a scorching heat. It was as though a gigantic volcano was surging within the body of the martial Dao Prime body. The terrifying lava almost drowned half-martial ancestor Chen Yu. The blood chi of half-martial ancestor Chen Yu was completely suppressed by the martial Dao Prime body. Against the attacks of the 4 half-martial ancestors, the martial Dao Prime body was in no hurry. He punched in reverse towards the astral hammers that descended from midair. Desolate Martial, you're truly arrogant. To think that you would dare to receive my half-martial ancestor dermic weapon barehanded. It's like striking a stone. Before half-martial ancestor Chun Yu could finish his sentence, a deafening bang sounded from the battlefield. Boom! The fist of the martial Dao Prime body collided heavily against Chen Yu's half-martial ancestor dermic weapon, the astral hammers. That scene looked a little ridiculous. As half-martial ancestor Chun Yu had said, this was akin to striking a stone with an egg. However, it was different from what he had imagined. His astral hammers were not the stone. The fist of the martial Tao prime body was the indestructible stone. After a loud bang, half-martial ancestor Chun Yu shuddered and his eyes widened in disbelief. He felt a terrifying power that surged like the sea and was as violent as fire surge into the astral hammers. He could not withstand that power at all. Half-martial ancestor Chun Yu's palm was torn instantly and fresh blood dripped. The flesh on his entire arm exploded into a blood mist, let alone his palm. The astral hammers flew out of his hands. At the same time, the martial Tao prime body extended his other palm and grabbed the gigantic sword formed by the earth-slaying sword chi that was slashing down from midair. "You must have a death wish," half-martial ancestor Diju said coldly. Snap! The martial Tao prime body grabbed the gigantic earth-slaying sword that resembled a divine dragon and sliced it into two. He threw it on the ground and the sword chi dissipated. At the same time, the martial Tao prime body flicked in reverse without even turning back. Clang! A metallic sound echoed sinisterly from the battlefield. Another sword chi dissipated. Finally, the expression of half-martial ancestor Diju changed. "When the Earth's killing intent is released, the dragon snake shall rise." The earth-slaying sword chi that he released actually contained two moves. One of them was the gigantic sword that resembled a divine dragon that slashed down. The other move was a slithering sword chi that was like a snake that stabbed towards the martial Tao prime body silently. This was the true killing move of the earth-slaying sword art. Over the years, there were extremely few cultivators who could defend against the gigantic divine dragon sword. Even if they could defend against the gigantic divine dragon sword, nobody could escape from the killing power of the snake sword chi. However, half-martial ancestor Diju had not expected that the martial Tao prime body would destroy the earth-slaying sword art with a casual punch and finger flick. The earth-slaying sword art is truly worthless in your hands. The martial Tao prime body sneered. The reason why he could destroy half-martial ancestor Diju's earth-slaying sword chi with ease was because his body was incomparably strong to begin with. It was also because half-martial ancestor Diju had not comprehended the essence of the earth-slaying sword art at all. What radiant sunlight! It's worthless. Suddenly, the martial Tao prime body hollered, "Extinguish." His body was like a martial Tao furnace, and the martial spirit fire burned continuously. The sudden roar that was released was even more terrifying than any sound domain secret skill. Crack, crack, crack. The blazing sun that was just conjured in half-martial ancestor Illumination's hands began to crack and its dermic powers drained, dissipating completely in the blink of an eye. A single roar from the martial Tao prime body destroyed the dermic art of half-martial ancestor Illumination. It was only then that the martial Tao prime body turned to look at the descending Great Chaos Essence Palm. Great Chaos Essence Palm? The martial Tao prime body nodded slightly. This secret skill is not bad. The martial Tao prime body did not make any motions and punched. Boom, boom. The millstone-like palm in midair exploded, and its dermic powers dissipated. The four half-martial ancestors had ashen expressions. The strength of the martial Tao prime body had far surpassed their imagination. In fact, he was much stronger than Desolate Martial in the battle at Enigma Palace, and their impression of him. The purple-robed Desolate Martial did not even use any dermic weapons and looked calm. He destroyed their dermic weapons, dermic arts, and secret skills with his bare hands. Something's not right. As though he realized something, D-Fan suddenly exclaimed, "You're not Desolate Martial. This body of yours is definitely not the Green Lotus true body. You're not a Dragon Phoenix either. Who are you? Even a Grade 7 creation Green Lotus doesn't have such power." The martial Tao prime body smiled. "You're right. The Desolate Martial in front of Enigma Palace and the Desolate Martial of the Dragon race were merely true bodies that I cultivated. What you're looking at right now is my actual prime body, Desolate Martial's prime body." The words Desolate Martial's prime body crushed the confidence of the 4 half-martial ancestors completely. 3 true bodies. Desolate Martial had 3 true bodies. The 2 true bodies that appeared in the cultivation world earlier on were not Desolate Martial's strongest strength. At the thought of this, D-Fan and the other 3 felt chills run down their spines. The Green Lotus true body and Dragon Phoenix true body alone almost turned the entire Tianhuang mainland upside down. What would things be like if this prime body of Desolate Martial were to appear? D-Fan and the other 3 did not dare to continue thinking. Escape. The 4 of them did not even have to communicate and turned to flee with a tacit understanding. Among them, D-Fan even took out a major transference talisman from his storage bag and tore it apart, wanting to teleport and leave this place. However, the Martial Dao Prime Body had already sealed the space before the battle. It was impossible for half-martial ancestor Diju and the others to dispel the barrier within a short period of time. Even the major transference talisman was useless. The Martial Dao Prime Body strode forward and arrived behind half-martial ancestor Chunyu in the blink of an eye. He raised his fist and punched down viciously. Sensing danger, half-martial ancestor Chunyu roared and his face turned purple. A ruthless glint flashed through half-martial ancestor Chun Yu's eyes as he swung his arm and waved his other astral hammer. He ignored the incoming fist of the Martial Dao Prime Body and smashed it towards the latter's head. This was an internecine outcome and a fight to the death. The Martial Dao Prime Body ignored half-martial ancestor Chun Yu's astral hammer and continued smashing down. He punched half-martial ancestor Chun Yu on the head. At the same time, the astral hammer smashed onto the head of the Martial Dao Prime Body. Half-martial ancestor Chen Yu's head was shattered by a punch from the Martial Dao Prime Body and his essence spirit was destroyed, dying on the spot. However, the Martial Dao Prime Body was completely unharmed. The astral hammer could not break his body either. The Martial Dao Prime Body did not have dermic weapons. His body was his strongest dermic weapon. Chapter 1493, Killing with Open Eyes. Chapter 1493, Killing with Open Eyes. Half-martial ancestor Chun Yu was killed by a punch from the Martial Dao Prime Body. When they saw that, D-Fan and the other 2 were even more scared out of their wits with terrible expressions. Ever since they became half-martial ancestors, they had never felt such a danger with their lives on the line. Mahayana patriarchs comprehended divine powers in the advanced ancient battlefield and would not appear casually. Half-martial ancestors were the strongest existences in Tianhuang mainland. Furthermore, they were the strongest paragons of the half-martial ancestors, who could threaten them. But today, when the 3 of them saw half-martial ancestor Chun Yu being hammered to death by Desolate Martial's punch, they felt their scalps tingle as though they were witnessing their deaths. Bang! 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 D-Fan and the other 2 attacked the surrounding barrier wildly, wanting to break free from the restraints and rush out of this space. Why are you guys struggling needlessly? The Martial Dao Prime Body said indifferently, even if you can break through the spatial barrier here, you won't be able to escape my pursuit. Those words destroyed the last hope in the hearts of D-Fan and the other 2. The 3 of them could not help but question themselves internally if they would be caught by Desolate Martial's Prime Body even if they managed to escape. Just as the 3 of them were slightly distracted, the Martial Dao Prime Body arrived before half-martial ancestor Illumination in the blink of an eye, as though he was taking a leisure stroll. You should die too. The Martial Dao Prime Body said casually, as though he had already declared the death penalty for half-martial ancestor Illumination. Desolate Martial. Seeing that he had nowhere to run, half-martial ancestor Illumination's gaze intensified as he grit his teeth. You've gone too far. Do you really think I don't have any trump cards? Before his sentence was finished, he channeled his bloodline wildly. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of a tsunami echoed from the body of half-martial ancestor Illumination. That was not all. The aura of the half-martial ancestor Illumination was still rising rapidly. Heaven and Earth Illumination. Half-martial ancestor Illumination shouted. Swoosh. A starry sky appeared behind half-martial ancestor illumination phenomenon, and the 36 heavenly dipper stars shone brightly. Bloodline phenomenon. Both D-Fan and half-martial ancestor D-Ju revealed astonished expressions when they saw that. They had known half-martial ancestor illumination for many years, but they did not know that the latter was still hiding such a trump card. Even half-martial ancestor Chunyu, who was proudest of his physique and bloodline, did not manage to condense a bloodline phenomenon. The astonishment in the eyes of D-Fan and half-martial ancestor D-Ju had just risen when they were replaced with endless fear and shock in the blink of an eye. The martial Tao prime body attacked. There were no dermic arts or secret skills. It was just a simple punch. Boom! There was a deafening bang. The 36 heavenly dipper stars in the firmaments were shattered. Half-martial ancestor Illumination's expression changed continuously as he staggered in retreat. With every step back, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Boom! Boom! The bloodline phenomenon was destroyed by a single punch from the martial Tao prime body. He was invincible. They stood no chance at all. The power displayed by the martial Tao prime body made D-Fan and half-martial ancestor D-Ju feel a sense of despair. In fact, the two of them could not even muster the desire to resist. The bloodline phenomenon of half-martial ancestor illumination shattered, and his body received a tremendous impact. Cracks appeared in his organs. Desolate Martial Yu. Just as half-martial ancestor illumination was about to speak, the martial Tao prime body had already arrived before him. Without giving him the chance to continue speaking, he extended his fair palm and patted the head of half-martial ancestor illumination gently. Piak. The gaze of half-martial ancestor illumination dimmed instantly. His head looked intact. However, his consciousness was penetrated by the power of the martial Tao prime body and was smashed. His essence spirit was destroyed and he died. The corpse of half-martial ancestor illumination fell from midair. After 2 punches and a palm strike, 2 half-martial ancestors were dead. D-Fan and half-martial ancestor D-Ju looked at everything helplessly and felt their limbs go cold. At that moment, the pride of half-martial ancestor D-Ju vanished completely. Half-martial ancestors were at the peak of the cultivation world and could kill all the mortals in Pingyang Town with a single thought. However, half-martial ancestors were no different from mortals in the face of death. His past glory and reputation had all turned into dust at this moment. Right then, the martial Tao prime body turned around and looked at D-Fan and half-martial ancestor D-Ju, who were not far away. D-Fan, the martial Tao prime body said indifferently, "You tried to kill me twice but failed. You're dead if I attack once." D-Fan had not expected that this existence that was once insignificant as an ant in his eyes would possess such power today. In fact, it could even look down on him and decide his life and death. Back in the Tao Inheritance Ground, when he forcefully broke into the Tao Inheritance Ground and tried to kill Desolate Martial, the latter was helpless. Even the creation Green Lotus was shattered by him. How many years had passed? To think that Desolate Martial would actually grow to such an extent. Desolate Martial. Half-martial ancestor D-Ju's expression changed indeterminately. Suddenly he said, "I don't have any deep feud with you. I'm only here this time round for your heaven-slaying sword art. If you spare my life today, I'm willing to hand over the earth-slaying sword art with cupped fists." Half-martial ancestor D-Ju knew very well that he could not move Desolate Martial unless he had enough bargaining chips. Therefore, he did not harbor any hope of luck and openly declared that he could hand over the earth-slaying sword art. "Indeed, there's no deep feud between us." The martial Tao prime body said, "However, since you intended to kill all the mortals in Pingyang Town, I can't keep you. As for the earth-slaying sword art, even if you don't hand it over, I can take it for myself." Before his sentence was finished, the martial Tao prime body attacked once more. Swoosh! Unknowingly, the martial Tao prime body had already arrived before half-martial ancestor D-Ju and punched over. To others, the fist of the martial Tao prime body was the most ordinary fist technique without any variation or unnecessary movements. However, One could only truly sense how terrifying that punch was after facing it head-on. The will pressure released by that punch almost caused half-martial ancestor Deju's Dao heart to collapse. There was no longer the martial Dao prime body in his vision. There was only that punch. Buzz. A sword hum sounded. Half-martial ancestor Deju drew his sword and attacked. His arm and wrist did not make much movement when the sword stabbed out with a sharp edge. Clang! When the sharpness of the sword struck the fist of the martial Dao prime body, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Half-martial ancestor Deju's expression changed starkly, and his entire arm went numb. Kill! Suddenly, his eyes shone with a sword beam. The sword beam stabbed towards the eyes of the martial Dao prime body. Visual technique. The two of them were way too close. The burst of the visual technique arrived instantly. The martial Dao prime body could not dodge either. The martial Dao prime body had a mocking expression and merely made a motion to close his eyes. Clang! The visual technique sword beam struck the eyelids of the martial Dao prime body and did not pierce it, merely leaving a faint white scar. It could not even be considered as a wound. The next moment, the martial Dao prime body opened his eyes. Once his eyes were open, he was going to kill. Chapter 1494, Death of Defan. Chapter 1494, Death of Defan. Half-martial ancestor Deju's visual technique was useless, and he lost the initiative. The martial Dao prime body opened his eyes and strode forward. Half-martial ancestor Deju raised his sword and stabbed. The martial Dao prime body's gaze was burning as he avoided the sword tip and flicked his finger gently, flicking the sword's spine. That was the most fragile part of the sword body. The sword trembled violently and was almost snapped into two by a single flick of the martial Dao prime body. Half-martial ancestor Deju could not hold on to his destiny dermic weapon, and it flew out of his hands. The martial Dao prime body scooped gently and gripped the sword in his palm, stabbing in reverse. Poof! Given the strength of the martial Dao prime body, his attack speed and every single punch and sword strike could release shocking lethality. Half-martial ancestor Deju could not dodge at all, and his chest was pierced by his destiny dermic weapon. It was not over yet. Half-martial ancestor Deju's expression changed starkly. His destiny dermic weapon seemed like it was about to explode in his chest. There was no time to think. With a swoosh, half-martial ancestor Deju's essence spirit escaped from the top of his head. Poof! Right then, his destiny dermic weapon exploded into sharp shards that sliced his body into pieces. Before he could react, a huge shadow enveloped him. The martial Dao prime body reached out and captured the essence spirit of half-martial ancestor Deju in his palm. Kill! Defan realized that the martial Dao prime body would not let him off at all. He threw caution to the wind and channeled his essence spirit to its limits, releasing 5 dermic arts and a secret skill in succession. At the same time, he swiped his storage bag and threw out more than 10 dermic weapons. The dermic arts, secret skills, and dermic weapons blanketed the skies and suppressed the martial Dao prime body. Just a final struggle. The martial Dao prime body had an indifferent expression. You can't even defend against a single punch from me. Boom! The martial Dao prime body attacked. A punch that was as vast as an ocean drowned the dermic arts and secret skills in midair instantly, devouring them without a trace. More than 10 dermic weapons were sent flying by the punch of the martial Dao prime body as well. By the time they fell, they were dim and completely crippled. Defan, you're finished. The martial Dao prime body looked down at Defan. The difference in strength between them was too great. Back when the martial Dao prime body was at the Dharma characteristic realm and fought against Rakshasa Yu, he had to release his bloodline phenomenon to suppress the latter. But now that the martial Dao prime body had entered the conjoint body realm, he did not even use his bloodline phenomenon. Boom! The martial Dao prime body punched out. Defan tore a protection talisman hurriedly. He had obtained that protection talisman when he explored the ancient ruins in the past. It could defend against the attacks of 10 half-martial ancestors let alone a single one. However, the protection talisman could not defend against a single punch from the martial Dao prime body. Crack, crack, crack. The protection talisman shattered. However, the aftershock of that punch was still unusually terrifying. D-Fan's body exploded as well, turning into a mist of blood that was beyond recognition. Poof! The martial Dao prime body advanced and extended his finger, tapping D-Fan gently on the glabella. D-Fan could not defend at all, and his head was pierced by the fingers of the martial Dao prime body instantly, dripping with blood. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying spirit consciousness fluctuation spread out. D-Fan knew that he was going to die and did not want to be humiliated. Therefore, he channeled his essence spirit recklessly, wanting to self-destruct and commit suicide on the spot. Humph! The martial Dao prime body sneered. You want to commit suicide in front of me? You can only die if I ask you to. If I don't, you're not even qualified to commit suicide. D-Fan fell into complete despair when he said that. A tragic feeling rose in his heart. As a half-martial ancestor expert, he could not even control his own life and death. Desolate Martial, what are you trying to do? D-Fan asked hatefully. Half-martial ancestor Qin Yu and half-martial ancestor Illumination had the shallowest feud with Desolate Martial, but they were killed by him decisively. However, he and half-martial ancestor Diju were left behind by Desolate Martial. Desolate Martial was definitely not a benevolent person. Could it be? D-Fan thought of a possibility. Desolate Martial, how dare you? Suddenly, D-Fan roared and struggled with all his might. However, pitch-black chains appeared from the ball of light in the martial Dao prime body's palm and coiled around the essence spirits of D-Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju. Soul-searching art. The martial Dao prime body had long attained greater mastery of the 30-odd inheritances in the Dao inheritance ground. The reason why he left D-Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju behind was because he wanted to obtain their secret skills. The earth-slaying sword art was something that the martial Dao prime body had to obtain. The soul-searching art began. The martial Dao prime body was immersed in the memories of D-Fan and half-master ancestor Diju and browsed through them rapidly as he filtered all useless information. A moment later, the essence spirits of D-Fan and half-martial ancestor Diju dimmed with lifeless expressions. The essence spirits of the two half-martial ancestors were equivalent to idiots now that their memories were completely stripped. He had benefited immensely from this soul search. The Great Chaos Essence Palm and Earth-Slaying Sword Art had already been obtained by the martial Dao Prime Body. Now that the martial Dao Prime Body had entered the conjoint body realm, his cultivation speed slowed down instantly. If he wanted to increase his speed and raise his cultivation as soon as possible, the simplest method was to use the martial Dao furnace to smelt cultivation techniques and secret skills continuously. He would turn those cultivation techniques and secret skills into his personal insights. Right now, the martial Dao Prime Body had obtained two top-tier cultivation techniques of the Great Chaos Essence Palm and Earth-Slaying Sword Art. As long as he could refine them, his strength would definitely increase once more. As for the storage bags of the four half-martial ancestors, there would definitely be some good stuff. That's not a bad idea. The martial Dao Prime Body narrowed his eyes in deep thought. Pingyang Town returned to normal before long. Extreme West, Kunlun Ruins. It had been 20 years since Su Zimo and the other two entered seclusion cultivation in the secret ground of the Kunlun Ruins. The power contained by that large chunk of Ashoka wood was extremely immense. By the time Su Zimo refined and absorbed it for the 5th year, he had already broken through to the mid-stage conjoint body realm. However, that was only a small portion of the power that was refined from the Ashoka wood. Su Zimo did not stop and continued cultivating. In the 10th year, Nian Qi broke through and entered the mid-stage conjoint body realm. In the 16th year, Extreme Fire broke through and entered the late-stage conjoint body realm. After entering the conjoint body realm, cultivation became extremely difficult. It was normal for there to be no progress in his cultivation after hundreds or thousands of years. If they were in Tianhuang mainland, Even if there were any immense opportunities, it would be difficult for Extreme Fire and Yin Qi to advance a minor realm in just 20 years. However, Extreme Fire and Yin Qi grew rapidly in the Kunlun ruins after consecutive battles and life and death experiences. 20 years passed by quickly, and Su Zimo was still cultivating, refining the Ashoka wood. He had already absorbed most of the Ashoka wood. At the same time, his cultivation realm had already reached the peak of the mid-stage conjoint body realm, and he was only a step away from breaking through. Extreme Fire and Yin Qi had already stopped cultivating. Unlike Su Zimo, the two of them did not have a treasure like the Ashoka wood for them to continuously absorb energy and cultivate. However, the two of them remained by Su Zimo's side, waiting for his cultivation to end. This day, Yin Qi, who was initially cultivating, suddenly opened her eyes and frowned slightly. Before long, Extreme Fire opened his eyes as well and frowned, saying softly, "Someone's here." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.